Some cases follow you home. You close the file, archive the reports, move on to the next assignment, but they linger in a corner of your mind, like a shadow that shifts when you look away. My name is Dorian Hale, FBI Special Agent. I've been doing this for 12 years. Murder, kidnapping, organized crime, cyber fraud. I've seen every shade of darkness. But none of it, absolutely none of it, compared to what happened in Ridgecrest. It was mid-February. I was sitting in my office in Washington, D.C., signing off on the closing paperwork from a previous case. Outside, snow was falling. A thin, wet snow. Through the window, the city's gray silhouette blurred into nothing. My phone rang at 7 in the morning. The caller was Celeste Warwick, Supervisory Special Agent, my direct superior. Warwick's voice is always sharp and precise. That morning, something was different. Maybe I imagined it, but there was a hesitation in her tone I couldn't quite place. Hale, urgent assignment. Nevada, Ridgecrest. Small town, population around 3,000. The local sheriff's office requested support. 2 days ago, they found a house. Inside, there are strange things. What kind of strange? I asked. Warwick paused for a moment. I heard keyboard sounds. She was checking the files. The house was abandoned years ago, but inside, they found audio recording devices, dozens of them, all operational, all running. The recordings, they don't make sense. I waited for her to elaborate. She didn't. Reeves Marston will be your partner on this one, she continued. He's already been briefed. Your flight leaves in 3 hours. Report back as soon as you have eyes on the scene. I'd worked with Reeves before. Solid agent, methodical, quiet, observant. The kind of partner who notices things you miss and doesn't need to broadcast it. If Warwick was pairing us on something like this, she expected complications. The flight to Nevada was uneventful. I spent most of it reviewing the preliminary file. Thin, barely 8 pages. The house had been discovered by a county surveyor mapping property lines for a proposed highway expansion. When he entered to check the structure's condition, he found the recording equipment. Panicked, called the sheriff. The sheriff listened to one of the recordings and immediately requested federal assistance. The file didn't say what was on the recording. That detail, conspicuously, was missing. Reeves met me at the Reno-Tahoe airport. He was waiting by the rental car area, coffee in hand, looking like he hadn't slept. Then again, Reeves always looked like that. Some people carry fatigue in their eyes. Reeves wore it like a coat. "Hale," he said, handing me a cup. "Long flight?" "Long enough. You read the file?" "Such as it is." He unlocked the SUV and we got in. Sheriff Denton is meeting us at the site. Said he'd rather show us than explain. That's never a good sign. The drive from Reno to Ridgecrest took nearly 4 hours. The landscape shifted gradually, from the scattered suburbs around Reno to the sparse vegetation of the high desert, and finally to the kind of emptiness that makes you aware of how small you are. Out there, civilization felt like a rumor. Gas stations and convenience stores appeared every 50 miles, then every 100. Eventually, even those disappeared. Just road, rock, and sky. Ridgecrest itself was unremarkable. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, 2 churches, and a sheriff's office the size of a double-wide trailer. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone, and strangers are noticed immediately. We pulled up to the sheriff's office just before noon. A man in his 50s was waiting outside. Broad-shouldered, gray mustache, the posture of someone who'd spent his life handling things himself. "Sheriff Denton?" I asked, extending my hand. He shook it once, firm. "Agents, appreciate you coming out. I'll be honest, I don't know what we've got here. Never seen anything like it in 30 years. We followed his patrol vehicle out of town, heading northeast. The roads turned to gravel, then to dirt. After about 20 minutes, we arrived at the property, if you could call it that. The house sat in a shallow valley, surrounded by nothing. No neighbors, no power lines, no mailbox, just the structure. Squat and weathered, like something the desert had tried to swallow and failed. Place has been abandoned since the 80s, Denton said as we walked toward it. Used to belong to a man named Harlan Vickers. He was some kind of researcher, university type, I think. Kept to himself. Moved away in 87 or 88. Nobody's been inside since. At least, that's what we thought. The front door was open. Not broken. Just open as if someone had left in a hurry and never came back. Inside, the house was frozen in time. Furniture covered in dust, curtains faded by the sun, newspapers from 1986 still stacked on a table. But it was the equipment that stopped me. In every room, the living room, the kitchen, both bedrooms, even the bathroom, there were audio recording devices. Old ones, reel-to-reel tape recorders, cassette decks, even a few newer digital units that looked out of place among the rest. They were arranged carefully, positioned in corners, on shelves mounted on walls. All of them were running. The reels turned slowly. The cassette wheels rotated. The digital displays showed timestamps counting forward. "How long have these been recording?" Reeves asked. Denton Hall shook his head. "That's the thing. Some of these tapes shouldn't even be able to hold a charge. The reel-to-reels haven't been manufactured in decades, but they're all running. All of them." I walked through the house slowly, counting. 43 devices in total. Different brands, different eras, but all performing the same function. Recording sound. "Who set this up?" I asked. "No idea," Denton said. "Power's been off in this house since Vickers left. No generator, no solar panels, nothing. We checked. The devices are running on their own." That didn't make sense. I said as much. Denton just nodded. "I know. That's why I called you." Reeves was examining one of the digital recorders, a small black unit mounted near the ceiling in the hallway. "These digital models, they're recent. Last 5 years, maybe less. Someone's been maintaining this setup, adding to it." "Or someone's been here," I said, "recently." We spent the next 2 hours cataloging the devices, photographing their positions, and preparing them for transport to our mobile lab. Denton arranged for a deputy to remain on site overnight while we processed the initial evidence. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, and the temperature had dropped into the 40s. Back in town, we set up in a conference room at the sheriff's office. Reeves connected a laptop to one of the digital recorders and began downloading the audio files. I opened the first cassette tape we'd collected, the one from the living room, the first device you'd see when entering the house. The recording started with silence. Not true silence. The ambient hiss of magnetic tape, the faint crackle of a dusty room. Then, after about 4 minutes, a voice, male, older, speaking in a flat monotone. "February 14th, day 1 of monitoring. Control environment established. Baseline noise floor measured at 32 decibels. Equipment synchronized. Begin observation." The voice stopped. The hiss continued. I let the tape run for another 10 minutes. Nothing. Just the sound of an empty room. "Research log," Reeves said, not looking up from his laptop. Vickers was monitoring something. Audio anomalies, maybe. There was a lot of fringe science in the 80s, EVP recordings, infrasound studies, that kind of thing. For 40 years? Reeves didn't answer. I switched to another tape. This one was from the kitchen. Same hiss, same ambient noise. But after 6 minutes, something different. A sound that didn't belong. A low, rhythmic tapping, like fingers on a table. tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. It continued for almost a minute, then stopped. Could be plumbing, I said. Water in the pipes, temperature expansion. Maybe, Reeves said. Play the next one. The next tape was from the back bedroom. This recording was different from the start. The hiss was louder, more abrasive, as if the tape itself was degraded. And underneath the hiss, barely audible, was a voice. Human, but distant, like someone speaking in another room through a closed door. I turned up the volume. The words were unintelligible, fragments, syllables, nothing coherent. But the rhythm was unmistakable. It was speech. "Is that from inside the house?" Reeves asked. The house was empty, I said. We listened for another 20 minutes. The voice faded in and out, sometimes clearer, sometimes buried beneath the static. At one point, I thought I heard my name, Dorian. Just the first syllable, stretched and distorted, but enough to make my chest tighten. I stopped the tape. "That's not on the recording," I said. Reeves looked at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I heard something, my name, but it's not." I rewound the tape, played it again. The same static, the same distant murmur. No name. Nothing that sounded even close. "Auditory pareidolia," Reeves said. "Your brain filling in patterns that aren't there. Happens with white noise." I nodded, but I didn't believe it. I'd heard something that shouldn't have been there. We worked until midnight, logging tapes and downloading files. The digital recordings were easier to process. Cleaner audio, time-stamped data, automatic file organization. But they were also stranger. Several of the files showed timestamps that didn't match the device's internal clock. One recording, dated 3 weeks earlier, had a duration of 9 hours and 42 minutes. But the file size was wrong. Too small for that length. When Reeves played it, the audio lasted only 6 minutes before cutting to silence. "Corrupted data," he said. "Could be a storage error. Flash memory degrades over time. All of them, some of them, enough." I didn't like it. None of it fit a pattern I could recognize. Someone had maintained this equipment for decades. Someone had added new devices. But for what? To record an empty house? To capture sounds that weren't there? The first break came the next morning. One of Denton's deputies searching the property's perimeter found a second structure about a quarter-mile from the main house. A root cellar, partially collapsed, hidden beneath a tangle of creosote bushes. Inside were more recordings, not tapes or digital files, but paper, handwritten logs, hundreds of pages dated from 1984 to 2019. The handwriting was small and cramped, difficult to read, but the content was clear enough. Harlan Vickers hadn't been conducting research. He'd been documenting something. Something he believed was in the house with him. Something he could only hear. The first entry read, "They speak when I'm not listening. I've placed recorders in every room. When I play them back, I hear them. But never when I'm there. They know. They're waiting." I closed the notebook and looked at Reeves. "We need to find Vickers," I said. Finding Harlan Vickers wasn't easy. The man had effectively disappeared in 1987. No forwarding address, no tax records, no Social Security activity after 1992. Reeves ran him through every database we had access to. NCIC, FinCEN, DMV records in all 50 states. Nothing. It was as if Vickers had walked out of that house in Ridgecrest and ceased to exist. But people don't just vanish. They leave traces, utility bills, medical records, property liens. It took 3 days, but we finally found him. Or rather, we found where he'd been. In 1903, a man matching Vickers' description had checked into a psychiatric facility in Flagstaff, Arizona. He'd been admitted involuntarily after a welfare check found him living in a storage unit, surrounded by recording equipment, convinced that the voices had followed him from Nevada. He spent 18 months in the facility before being released to a halfway house. After that, the trail went cold again. The facility was still operational, a private institution called Pinewood Behavioral Health. I called ahead and spoke with the records department. They confirmed that a patient named Harlan Vickers had been treated there between 93 and 95. His diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenia with auditory hallucinations. His attending physician had retired, but his case file was still on record. I requested a copy. While we waited for the file, Reeves and I continued processing the audio recordings. We'd transported 43 devices back to the mobile lab in Ridgecrest, along with Vickers' handwritten logs. The logs were disturbing, not because they described anything explicitly dangerous, but because of their tone. Vickers wrote with the calm precision of a scientist, even as his observations grew increasingly irrational. April 3rd, 1985. The voice in the kitchen returns between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock a.m. It speaks in fragments. I cannot determine the language. Possibly English, possibly something older. I have increased the sensitivity of the microphones. June 17th, 1985. Today I played back a recording from the bedroom. My own voice is on the tape, speaking words I did not say. I have no memory of this. I will install a secondary recorder to verify. September 9th, 1985. There are 2 of me on the tapes now. One speaks during the day, one speaks at night. They do not sound the same. The entries continued in this vein for years. Vickers documented every anomaly, every perceived voice, every inexplicable sound. He drew diagrams of the house, marking the locations of each recorder and the times when the voices were most active. He developed theories that the house was built on a site of acoustic significance, that the walls themselves retained sound like a kind of architectural memory, that something was using the recordings to communicate with him. None of it made sense. All of it was meticulously recorded. Then, in 1987, the entries stopped. The last one was dated October 22nd. I have to leave. They know I can hear them now. They're getting louder. I can hear them even when the recorders are off, even when I cover my ears. They're inside the walls. They're inside me. I have to go before they finish. After that, nothing. Until 2019, when a new entry appeared in a different notebook. Same handwriting, same cramped style. I came back. I had to know if they were still here. They are. They've been waiting. That was the last entry. We found the notebook in the root cellar, beneath a pile of newer audio equipment. The digital recorders that Reeves had identified as recent additions. He came back, I said. 32 years later. He came back to the house and started recording again. Then where is he now? Reeves asked. That was the question. Vickers had been in Ridgecrest recently, within the last few years, based on the equipment. But he wasn't in the house. He wasn't in town. As far as we could tell, he wasn't anywhere. The psychiatric file arrived the next day, sent via secure fax from Pinewood. It was 80 pages long. Intake assessments, therapy notes, medication logs, discharge summaries. The diagnosis was consistent: paranoid schizophrenia, characterized by persistent auditory hallucinations and delusional beliefs centered on external surveillance. Vickers believed he was being monitored by entities that existed in sound. He believed they could speak to him through recordings, and that they could hear him in return. His attending physician, a psychiatrist named Dr. Eleanor Marsh had written extensively about his case. She noted that Vickers was highly intelligent and articulate, with no history of mental illness prior to 1986. His symptoms had emerged suddenly, following what he described as a breakthrough in his acoustic research. Dr. Marsh suspected that prolonged isolation and obsessive focus on his work had triggered a psychotic break. She treated him with antipsychotic medication and cognitive behavioral therapy. By the time he was discharged in 1995, his symptoms were manageable. He denied hearing voices. He agreed that his previous beliefs had been delusions. But Dr. Marsh had also included a personal note at the end of the file, not part of the official record, but handwritten on a separate sheet. Patient Vickers made significant progress during his time here. However, I remain uncertain about the nature of his condition. His descriptions of the voices were unusually consistent, not just in content, but in structure. Most patients with auditory hallucinations report fragmented or nonsensical speech. Vickers' voices spoke in complete sentences. They referenced specific events. On several occasions, he predicted things that later occurred, small things, inconsequential but accurate. I do not believe in the supernatural, but I also cannot explain what I observed. I hope, for his sake, that the medication continues to work. I hope he never goes back to that house. I read that note 3 times. Then I showed it to Reeves. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, we need to listen to all of it, every recording. If something's on those tapes, we need to find it. We set up a systematic review. 43 devices, hundreds of hours of audio. We split the work. Reeves took the digital files. I handled the analog tapes. We used noise reduction software to clean up the hiss and static, isolating any sounds that fell outside the ambient baseline. Most of the recordings were exactly what you'd expect. Silence, punctuated by occasional creaks and pops as the house settled. Wind against the windows. The distant call of birds. Normal sounds, explained by normal causes. But some of them weren't. The tapping I'd heard on the first tape, the rhythmic, deliberate tapping, appeared on 6 different recordings, all captured in the kitchen. It always occurred between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock a.m. It always lasted exactly 57 seconds. And it always stopped the same way. 3 quick taps, then silence. I couldn't identify the source. The pattern was too regular for plumbing, too deliberate for rodents. The voice I'd heard in the bedroom was present on multiple tapes as well. A low, indistinct murmur buried beneath the static. I ran it through audio analysis software trying to isolate the frequency. The results were strange. The voice didn't register on the spectrogram the way human speech should. It was there, audible, but the waveform was flat. No peaks, no valleys. Just a steady line, like a tone, not a voice at all. "That's not possible," Reeves said when I showed him. "Speech has variable amplitude. It's how we form words. This is something else." "Like what?" He didn't answer. On the 4th day, I found something that made me stop. It was on a cassette tape from the living room recorded in 1986. The first 20 minutes were silence. Then, abruptly, a voice. Clear, distinct, and undeniably human. "Hello, Dorian." I stopped the tape. My hands were steady, but my pulse wasn't. "Reeves?" He came over. I rewound the tape, played it again. "Hello, Dorian." The voice was male, older, calm. The same flat monotone as the research logs. Harlan Vickers. "That's your name," Reeves said. "I know. On a tape recorded in 1986. I know." We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking. Then Reeves reached over and ejected the cassette. He held it up to the light, examining the label. It was handwritten. LR 17, Feb 1986. Could be a coincidence, he said. Dorian isn't a common name, but it's not unique. Vickers could have known someone else named Dorian. He was alone. The logs say he was alone for years. Then it's a coincidence. Or it's something he added later. He came back to the house. He could have re-recorded over the original tapes. It was a reasonable explanation. Logical. The kind of answer I would have accepted a week earlier. But I didn't believe it. The tape was old. The audio quality was degraded in ways that couldn't be faked, and Vickers had no reason to record my name in 1986. He didn't know me. He couldn't have known me, unless he wasn't the one speaking. I pushed that thought away. It wasn't productive. It wasn't rational. But it stayed with me, lodged in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't reach. The next morning, Sheriff Denton called with news. A hiker had found a body in the desert, about 3 miles east of the Vickers property. Male, elderly, deceased for approximately 2 to 3 weeks. No identification, but the clothing matched the description we'd circulated for Vickers. We drove out to the site with the sheriff. The body had been found in a dry wash, partially covered by sand and debris. The medical examiner was already on scene, crouched beside the remains. Cause of death appeared to be exposure, dehydration, hyperthermia, the usual consequences of being stranded in the desert without water or shelter. There were no signs of foul play, no wounds, no ligature marks, no defensive injuries, just an old man who had walked into the desert and never walked out. But there was one detail that didn't fit. Clutched in the dead man's hand was a small audio recorder, a digital unit, the same model we'd found in the house. The device was still running. The display showed a recording in progress, duration 47 days. That's longer than he's been dead, the ME said. Battery shouldn't last that long. Reeves took the recorder, careful not to disturb the body more than necessary. He pressed stop. The display flickered, then showed the total recording time, 1,228 hours. 47 days. Continuous. That's impossible, I said. I know, Reeves replied. We bagged the recorder as evidence and transported it back to the lab. The body was taken to the county morgue for autopsy. Fingerprint analysis confirmed what we already suspected. The deceased was Harlan Vickers, age 78. Last known address the property in Ridgecrest. That night, we listened to the final recording. It started with footsteps, the crunch of gravel, the shuffle of uneven terrain. Vickers was walking. His breathing was audible, labored, the breath of an old man exerting himself. For the first hour, there was nothing else, just the sound of a man moving through the desert. Then he started talking. I know you can hear me. I know you're listening. I've been listening to you for 40 years. I've heard what you say when you think I'm not there. I've heard you in the walls, in the tapes, in my own voice when I play it back. You've been with me since the beginning. Before the beginning. You were waiting for me in that house. You were waiting for someone to listen. His voice was calm, not frightened, not frantic, resigned. I tried to leave. I thought if I left, you'd stay. But you didn't. You followed me. You're in the recordings, all of them. Every tape I ever made, you're there. I can't get away from you. I can't stop hearing you, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to walk until I can't walk anymore. And when I stop, maybe you will too. The recording continued for another 46 hours. Vickers' footsteps slowed, then stopped. His breathing grew shallow. At some point, he stopped speaking entirely. The last sound on the recording, the very last, before the battery should have died but didn't, was a voice. Not Vickers' voice. A voice I recognized. My own. Hello, Harlan. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the conference room at the sheriff's office, staring at the audio waveform on my laptop, replaying those two words over and over. "Hello, Harlan." The voice was mine. The same pitch, the same cadence, the same flat affect I heard when I listened to my own recorded statements. But I hadn't said it. I hadn't been there. The recording was made 3 weeks before I even knew this case existed. Reeves ran the audio through voice analysis software, comparing the sample to recordings of my actual speech. The match was 94.7%. Not identical, but close, closer than a coincidence could explain, closer than an impersonation should be. "Could be synthesis," he said. "Deepfake audio. If someone had samples of your voice, they could generate a convincing replica." From what samples? I've never been recorded outside of official channels. My voice isn't on the internet, it's not in any public database. "Then I don't know," Reeves admitted. "I don't know what this is." Neither did I. But I knew what it felt like. It felt like the case was looking back at me. Like something in those recordings had been waiting. Not just for anyone, but for me specifically. I called Warwick the next morning and requested additional resources. I wanted a full forensic audio team, a behavioral analyst, maybe even a technical consultant from the NSA if we could get one. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You're asking me to allocate significant federal resources to a case involving audio anomalies and the death of an elderly psychiatric patient," she said. "I'm asking you to help me understand what we're dealing with. This isn't a normal case, Celeste. Something is wrong here. Then figure out what it is. That's why I sent you." She hung up. No additional resources, no backup. Just me, a Reeves, and a room full of recordings that didn't make sense. We went back to the house. I don't know why. Rationally, we'd already processed the scene. We'd collected the equipment, the logs, the body. There was nothing left to find, but I felt pulled back there. A need to stand in those rooms again, to see what Vickers had seen, to understand what had happened to him. The house was the same, dusty, silent, empty. Without the recording equipment, it felt even more hollow, a shell stripped of purpose. We walked through the room slowly, looking for anything we might have missed. We found nothing. Then Reeves called me to the back bedroom. He was standing near the closet, shining his flashlight at the wall. "Look at this." I looked. At first, I didn't see anything. Just faded wallpaper, water stains, the usual decay. Then I noticed the pattern, lines scratched into the wall beneath the paper. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, etched into the plaster in tight, overlapping rows. "Tally marks," Reeves said. But they weren't. I looked closer. The lines weren't uniform. They varied in length, in angle, in spacing. They were grouped in clusters of 5, but not always the same 5. Some groups had 3 lines, some had 7, and between the clusters there were other marks, symbols I didn't recognize, shapes that didn't correspond to any alphabet I knew. "He was recording something," I said. "Not just audio. He was tracking something." "Tracking what?" I didn't answer. I took out my phone and photographed the marks, trying to capture the entire pattern. It covered most of the wall, from floor to ceiling, hidden beneath the wallpaper like a secret he'd tried to bury. That night, back at the office, I spread the photographs across the conference table and tried to make sense of them. The marks weren't random, they were organized, sequential, building toward something. But I couldn't see what. The pattern was there, just beyond my understanding, like a word on the tip of my tongue that I couldn't quite speak. Reeves was reviewing the audio files again, running them through new filters, trying to isolate the anomalies we'd detected. Around midnight, he stopped. "Hale, Come here." I walked over to his station. He had one of the digital recordings pulled up, a file from the hallway, recorded 6 days before we arrived. "Listen to this," he said. He pressed play. Static, ambient noise and the creak of settling wood. Then, faintly, beneath the other sounds, footsteps. Not Vickers' footsteps. These were lighter, quicker, the stride of someone younger. "That's inside the house," I said. "Wait." The footsteps moved down the hall toward the bedroom. Then they stopped. Silence for 10 seconds, 20. Then a voice, distant, muffled, but audible. "He's listening again." Another voice responding, "Let him listen." The first voice, "Should we tell him?" The second voice, "He already knows." The recording ended. Reeves and I stared at the screen. "Who else was in that house?" I asked. "No one. Denton's deputy checked it every day. No signs of entry, no disturbance, nothing." "Then, what are we listening to?" Reeves shook his head. He didn't know. Neither did I. I spent the next 2 days analyzing those voices, trying to identify them. I ran them through voice recognition databases. I compared them to Vickers' recorded speech, to each other, to every known sample I could access. The results were inconclusive. The voices were human. The software confirmed that much. They had natural inflection, realistic timbre, appropriate frequency range. But they didn't match anyone. They existed only on that recording, in that moment, speaking words that seemed to be about us. On the third day, I found something else. I was reviewing Vickers' handwritten logs, looking for any reference to the symbols on the wall, when I noticed a pattern in his entries. Every few pages he would include a string of numbers. Dates, I'd assumed, written in a European format. Day, month, year. But when I converted them, they didn't correspond to the dates of his entries. They were future dates. Some of them hadn't happened yet. The most recent string was 17/02/2024, February 17th, 2024. 3 days from now. I showed Reeves. He stared at the numbers for a long time. "What happens in 3 days?" he asked. "I don't know." "Then we wait." I didn't want to wait. Waiting felt passive, felt like letting the case control us instead of the other way around. But I didn't have a better option. Whatever Vickers had been tracking, whatever he'd been counting down to, we were about to find out. On the morning of February 17th, I woke early. I hadn't slept well. Fragmented dreams, half-remembered images of empty rooms and distant voices. I showered, dressed, drove to the office. Reeves was already there, coffee in hand, watching the monitors. "Anything?" I asked. "Not yet." We waited. We reviewed files, answered emails, pretended to work on other tasks, but we both kept glancing at the clock, watching the hours tick by. At 2:47 p.m., the call came in. It was Sheriff Denton. His voice was tight. "Agents, you need to get out here. Something's happened at the house." We drove fast, sirens off, not wanting to draw attention. The house looked the same as before, empty, abandoned, inert. But there were 2 patrol cars parked outside, and Denton was standing on the porch, looking at something I couldn't see. We walked up. The front door was open. Inside, in the center of the living room, where we had found the first recording device, there was now a chair. A simple wooden chair placed in the exact middle of the floor, facing the wall. On the chair was a tape recorder. A reel-to-reel old model, the kind Vickers had used in the 80s. It was running. The reels turned slowly, silently, recording. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Denton shook his head. "It wasn't here this morning. My deputy checked the house at 8 a.m. The room was empty." "Who's been here since then?" "No one. We've had the road blocked since Vickers was found. No vehicles in or out." I approached the chair. The recorder was ancient, dusty, battered, the kind of thing you'd find in an antique store. But the tape was new, fresh, shiny, recently spooled. "Don't touch it," Reeves said. He was already pulling on gloves, preparing to process the scene. We photographed the room, documented the position of the chair, dusted for prints. Found nothing. No prints, no fibers, no DNA. Just the chair and the recorder, sitting there as if they'd always been there. When the techs arrived to transport the equipment, I made a decision. I told them to wait. Then I reached over and pressed stop. The reel slowed, then halted. The display showed a recording time of 6 hours and 14 minutes. "We need to listen to it," I said. "Now." Reeves nodded. We loaded the tape into a portable player, connected it to a speaker, and pressed play. The first hour was silence. Standard ambient noise, nothing unusual. Then, gradually, sounds began to emerge. Footsteps moving through the house. Doors opening and closing. Drawers sliding open, then shut. The sounds of someone searching, methodical, unhurried, thorough. Then a voice. My voice. "Where is it?" Another voice. Reeves' voice. "I don't know. Keep looking." My voice. "We're running out of time." Reeves' voice. "I know." The recording continued for another hour. More searching, more conversation. Our voices discussing the case, referencing details we hadn't shared with anyone. At one point, I heard myself say something that made my skin crawl. He left it for us. He knew we'd come. The recording ended there. 6 hours and 14 minutes of audio that hadn't happened. Couldn't have happened. We'd been at the office all day, reviewing files, waiting for the date on Vickers' calendar. We hadn't gone to the house. We hadn't searched for anything. We hadn't spoken those words, but the tape said otherwise. "This isn't possible," Reeves said. "I know. Tapes don't record things that didn't happen. I know." We stood there in the living room of that empty house, and I felt something shift. Not in the room, in me. A fundamental change in what I thought I understood about how things worked. Because either we were losing our minds, or the recordings were real. And if the recordings were real, then time didn't move the way we thought it did. Cause didn't precede effect. The future could speak to the past. I looked at Reeves. He looked back at me. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. The house was recording us. It had always been recording us. And now, finally, it wanted us to know. We stayed in Ridgecrest for another week. I told myself it was to close the case properly, finalize the reports, coordinate with local authorities, ensure all evidence was properly cataloged and stored. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something, that the house still had secrets, and they were waiting for us to find them. Reeves felt it too. I could see it in the way he reviewed the audio files over and over, running the same filters, looking for patterns that weren't there. He'd become obsessed with the recording from February 17th, our voices, speaking words we'd never said. He analyzed the waveforms, compared them to known samples, ran them through every detection algorithm he could find. The results were always the same. The voices were authentic. They were ours. There was no evidence of manipulation, no sign of synthesis or splicing. The recording was genuine, but it couldn't be genuine. We hadn't been there. We hadn't spoken those words. "Maybe we will," Reeves said one night, staring at his screen. "Maybe the recording is from the future. Maybe it's something we haven't done yet." That's not how time works. I know. But what if it's how this works? What if the house captures things, not just sound, but moments, events, What if it recorded something that hasn't happened yet? I didn't have an answer for that. I wasn't sure there was one. On our last day in Ridgecrest, I went back to the house alone. I didn't tell Reeves, I didn't tell Denton. I just drove out there in the early morning before the sun was fully up and parked in the dirt lot where the surveyor had first seen the building. I sat in the car for a long time, watching the house. It looked smaller than I remembered. Ordinary. Just a structure in the desert, slowly being reclaimed by time. I got out and walked to the front door. It was closed now. Denton had secured it after we finished processing the scene, but I had the key. He'd given it to me for emergencies, though I think we both knew I'd end up here. The house was empty. The recorders were gone, shipped to the FBI lab in Quantico for further analysis. The chair was gone too, taken as evidence. Without them, the rooms felt even more hollow, just walls and floors, and the smell of dust. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, the way I had that first day. Living room, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom. The marks on the wall were still there, barely visible beneath the peeling wallpaper. Vickers' tally, his countdown, his record of something I still didn't understand. I ended up in the back bedroom, standing near the closet. The light was gray, filtered through dirty windows. I could hear the wind outside, pressing against the walls. And then I heard something else. A sound, faint, barely there, coming from inside the closet. I opened the door. The closet was empty. We'd cleaned it out during processing, but the sound was there. A low hum, almost below the range of hearing. I leaned closer, trying to locate the source. The sound stopped. Then, from behind me, a voice. "You're listening." I spun around. The room was empty. No one there. Just the walls and the dust and the gray light. But I'd heard it. Clear, distinct, unmistakable. Not recorded, not played back, spoken. In that room, in that moment, to me. I left the house. I drove back to town without stopping. I found Reeves at the office, packing up our equipment, and I told him we were done. The case was closed. We had enough for the report. It was time to go home. He looked at me for a long moment. He knew something had happened, but he didn't ask, and I didn't tell him. We flew back to D.C. that afternoon. I filed my report the next day, straightforward, factual, leaving out the details that couldn't be explained. The death of Harlan Vickers was ruled a result of exposure. The audio anomalies were attributed to equipment malfunction and environmental factors. The case was closed, filed away, forgotten by everyone except the two people who had worked it. 3 months later, I received a package. It came to my office, addressed to me by name, no return address. Inside was a cassette tape, old, dusty, the kind Vickers had used. Handwritten on the label in cramped, familiar script, DH1. I put the tape in a player. I pressed play. For 3 minutes there was nothing. Silence. Ambient hiss. Then, faintly, a voice. My voice. "You're listening." A second voice, identical to mine. "I know." The first voice, "Did you find it?" The second voice, "Not yet." "You will." "When?" A pause. Then, "You already have." The tape ended. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the player. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary rhythms. Traffic, voices, the sound of life continuing. But in that room, in that moment, I was back in the house, back in the closet, back in the space where sound became something else. I've listened to that tape many times since then. Each time, I hear something different. A word that wasn't there before. A pause that's longer or shorter. The voices shifting, overlapping, moving through time in ways I can't track. The recording isn't static. It's changing. It's still being made. I don't know what Harlan Vickers found in that house. I don't know what he spent 40 years trying to record. But I know what he was listening for. I know because I'm listening for it now. The sound that speaks when no one is there. The voice that knows your name before you arrive. The recording that captures what hasn't happened yet. Some cases follow you home. This one didn't follow me. It was already there. It was waiting. Last week, I found myself writing something. Not a report, not a memo, just notes scratched on a legal pad late at night. I don't remember writing them. I don't remember what I was thinking. But when I looked at the page the next morning, I saw what I'd written. Tally marks. Dozens of them grouped in clusters of 5 and 3 and 7. And between them, symbols I didn't recognize, shapes that didn't correspond to any alphabet I knew. I threw the pad away. The next day, it was back on my desk. The marks were different. There were more of them. I've stopped counting. There's a folder in every field office that no one talks about. It sits in the back of the archives, marked with a red tab, filed under administrative hold. These are the cases that were closed but never solved. The ones where the evidence didn't add up, where the witnesses disappeared, where the Bureau decided it was better to move on than to keep digging. I've seen a few of them over the years. Most agents have. You learn not to ask questions. But sometimes a case comes back. My name is Jonas Merrick. I've been with the FBI for 9 years, most of it in the field. I've worked kidnappings in Montana, bank robberies in Nevada, a string of arsons in rural Oregon that turned out to be insurance fraud. I've seen violence, desperation, the worst of what people do to each other. I thought I'd seen everything. Then they reopened the Caldwell file. The call came on a Thursday morning in late October. I was at my desk in the Salt Lake City field office, finishing paperwork from a fraud case that had finally gone to trial. My supervisor, a veteran agent named Harlan Greaves, appeared at my door with an expression I'd never seen on him before. It wasn't concern exactly. It was something closer to reluctance. "Merrick, got a minute?" I followed him to his office. He closed the door, unusual for Greaves, who prided himself on transparency. Then he sat down and slid a folder across the desk. "You know this case?" I looked at the cover. Caldwell Marcus. Case number, date opened, date closed, the red tab. "I've heard of it," I said. "Before my time." 19-7. Witness in a federal racketeering case. Key testimony against the Salerno family out of Chicago. 2 days before he was supposed to testify, he vanished. No body, no ransom, no contact. Just gone. And it was closed. After 3 years. No leads, no evidence, nothing to work with. The case against Salerno fell apart without him. The family walked. I waited. There was more coming. Greaves leaned back in his chair. Yesterday, someone called the Chicago field office. Said they knew where Marcus Caldwell was. Said he was alive. That got my attention. Witnesses don't stay missing for 37 years and then turn up alive. They turn up dead, or they don't turn up at all. Who made the call? Anonymous. Payphone in downstate Illinois, town called Millbrook. Population 800. The caller said Caldwell was living there under a different name. Said he'd been there since '89. And we believe this. Greaves shrugged. Chicago ran it through analysis. The voice was female, older, probably 60s or 70s. No match in the system, but she knew details about Caldwell that were never made public. His wife's maiden name, the name of his daughter, the address of his safe house before he disappeared. Inside information. Or she knew him. Either way, we need to check it out. He pushed a second folder across the desk. Travel authorization, contact information, a rental car confirmation. You're on a flight tomorrow morning. I'm sending Amelia Starks with you. She's our best evidence tech. And Tobias Renly from Behavioral. If Caldwell's really out there, we need to know what happened to him and why he's been hiding for almost 4 decades. I took the folders. Why me? Greaves looked at me for a moment. Then he said something that stayed with me for the rest of the case. Because you're good at finding things that don't want to be found. I flew into Springfield the next morning and met Starks and Renly at the rental car counter. Amelia Starks was in her early 40s, precise, methodical, the kind of person who noticed details others missed. Tobias Renly was younger, late 20s, with the quiet intensity of someone who spent too much time thinking about how people's minds worked. We'd never worked together before, but I'd heard good things about both of them. The drive to Millbrook took 2 hours, mostly on 2-lane roads through flat, empty farmland. The sky was gray, the fields brown and stubbled after the harvest. It was the kind of landscape that made you feel small, miles of nothing in every direction, broken only by the occasional farmhouse or grain silo. Millbrook itself was barely a town. A main street with a hardware store, a diner, a post office, a church. A few dozen houses spread out along gravel roads. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were noticed immediately. We checked into the only motel, a single-story building with 12 rooms and a flickering vacancy sign. The manager, an older woman with gray hair and suspicious eyes, looked at our credentials for a long time before handing over the keys. FBI, she said. We don't get many of you out here. We're just following up on a lead, I said. Probably nothing. She nodded, but her expression didn't change. Let me know if you need anything. We set up in my room, spreading the case files across the bed and the small table by the window. Starks started organizing the evidence logs while Renly reviewed the original witness interviews. I read through the primary file, trying to get a sense of who Marcus Caldwell was. He'd been a bookkeeper for the Salerno family, not a made man, just a numbers guy who'd handled their legitimate businesses. When the feds started building a RICO case in '86, Caldwell got cold feet and offered to cooperate. He had records, documents, enough to put half the family away. The Bureau set him up in a safe house outside Chicago, guarded around the clock, waiting for the trial. Then, on March 15, 1907, he vanished. The guards reported nothing unusual. Caldwell had dinner at 7, watched television until 9, then went to bed. When they checked on him at 6 the next morning, his room was empty. The window was closed and locked from the inside. The door was still secured. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle. He was simply gone. The Bureau spent 3 years looking for him. They investigated the Salerno family, assuming a hit. They searched every database, every morgue, every John Doe report in the country. Nothing. Marcus Caldwell had disappeared as completely as if he'd never existed. Until now. The next morning, we started canvassing. Millbrook was small enough that we could cover it in a day. Talk to the shopkeepers, the postmaster, anyone who might have seen a man matching Caldwell's description. We had an age-progressed photo, generated by the Bureau's imaging lab, showing what Caldwell might look like at 72. The first few interviews yielded nothing. The hardware store owner didn't recognize the photo. Neither did the woman at the post office or the clerk at the gas station. But at the diner, we got our first hit. The waitress was in her 50s, friendly, talkative. When I showed her the photo, she stopped mid-pour and stared at it. "That's Mr. Carver," she said. "You know him?" "Sure. He's been coming in here for years. Quiet man, keeps to himself. Lives out on Route 12 past the old Hendricks farm." I felt something shift in my chest. When did he move here? Oh, a long time ago. Late 80s, I think. Before I started working here, but everyone knows Mr. Carver. What can you tell us about him? She thought for a moment. Not much, honestly. He comes in for breakfast a couple times a week. Always orders the same thing: eggs, toast, black coffee. Doesn't talk much. Polite, but distant. Like he's somewhere else, you know? Does he have any family, friends? Not that I've seen. He's always alone. She hesitated. There was a woman who used to visit him years ago. Older lady, came down from Chicago a few times, but I haven't seen her in, must be 10 years now. I thanked her, and we left. Outside, Renly was quiet, processing. He's been here the whole time, he said. 37 years, living under a false name, and no one ever looked for him here. Why would they? Starks said. Millbrook isn't on anyone's radar. It's the perfect place to disappear. But why disappear at all? I asked. He was in protective custody. He had guards, a safe house, the full resources of the Bureau. Why would he run? No one had an answer. We drove out to Route 12, following the waitress's directions. The road was gravel, rutted, winding through fields of dead corn and bare trees. After about 3 miles, we saw it. A small farmhouse, white clapboard, set back from the road at the end of a long driveway. There was a pickup truck parked in front, rusted and old. Smoke rose from the chimney. We parked at the end of the driveway and approached on foot. The house was quiet. No movement in the windows, no sound except the wind. I knocked on the front door, waited, knocked again. The door opened. The man standing there was old, mid-70s, maybe older. Thin, stooped, with white hair and deep lines around his eyes. He looked at us without expression. "Mr. Carver?" I said. He didn't answer. I held up my credentials. "I'm Special Agent Jonas Merrick, FBI. These are Agents Starks and Renly. We'd like to ask you a few questions." The man looked at my badge for a long moment. Then he looked at me. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. He stepped back and let us in. The inside of the house was sparse. A living room with a worn couch and a single armchair. A kitchen with a small table and 2 chairs. A hallway leading to what I assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean but old, like a place that had been frozen in time. The man who called himself Carver sat in the armchair and gestured for us to take the couch. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone in pain. "You know why we're here?" I said. "I can guess. We received information that Marcus Caldwell is living in this town, under a different name." He didn't react, just sat there, hands folded in his lap, watching us. "Are you Marcus Caldwell?" A long pause, then, "I was, a long time ago." Starks and I exchanged a look. This was it. After 37 years, we'd found him. "Why did you run?" I asked. "You were in protective custody. You were safe." "No," he said. "I wasn't." "The Salerno family, they found you." He shook his head. "Not them, something else." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. He just sat there staring at a spot on the wall behind us, his expression flat and distant. Renly leaned forward. "Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Carver, can you tell us what happened the night you disappeared?" Another long pause. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I heard something, in the room. A sound I couldn't identify, like static, but organized, patterned. I thought it was the television, but the television was off. I thought it was the radio, but there was no radio. The sound was coming from everywhere. From the walls. From inside my own head." He stopped, His hands, I noticed, were trembling. I tried to call for the guards, but I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just lay there listening to it, and then I understood. Understood what? That it was telling me something. That if I stayed, I would die. Not from the Salernos, from something else, something that had found me. He looked at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made my skin prickle. Fear. Not the fear of a man recounting a memory, but the fear of a man who was still, after all these years, afraid. So I left, he said. I opened the window, and I left. I don't know how I got out without the guards seeing me. I don't remember most of that night. But I knew I had to go. I knew if I stayed, the sound would take me. Starks spoke carefully. Mr. Caldwell, the window was locked from the inside. The guards checked it the next morning. I know. How is that possible? He didn't answer. We interviewed him for another 2 hours. He answered our questions slowly, sometimes pausing for minutes at a time, as if retrieving the memories from a great distance. He told us how he'd traveled south after leaving Chicago, moving from town to town, paying cash, using false names. He'd arrived in Millbrook in 1989 and never left. He'd built a life here, quiet, isolated, invisible. He hadn't contacted his family. He hadn't contacted anyone from his old life. He'd simply ceased to exist. And the sound? I asked. Did it follow you? He looked at me for a long moment, then, yes. You still hear it? Sometimes. Late at night, when the house is quiet? He paused. It's waiting. It's been waiting all this time. We left the house as the sun was setting, the sky streaked with orange and red. None of us spoke until we were back at the motel. He's delusional, Starks said. Paranoid schizophrenia, auditory hallucinations. It fits. The stress of the trial, the isolation of protective custody. It triggered a psychotic break, and he's been living in it ever since. Maybe, Renly said. But his affect was wrong. Schizophrenics with auditory hallucinations usually show disorganized thinking, loose associations. He was coherent, linear. He knew exactly what he was saying. Then he's lying. About what? Why would he lie about hearing sounds? Why would he invent a story that makes him seem insane? I didn't have an answer. None of it made sense. A man disappears from a locked room, flees across the country, hides for 37 years, and when we finally find him, he claims he was running from a sound. That night, I reviewed the original case file again, looking for anything that might explain what Caldwell had told us. I found something I'd missed before. In the days before his disappearance, the guards at the safe house had logged several unusual incidents. On March 12th, the television in Caldwell's room turned on by itself at 3:00 a.m. On March 13th, the phone in the kitchen rang repeatedly, but when answered, there was only static. On March 14th, the night before he vanished, one of the guards reported hearing a rhythmic sound like tapping coming from Caldwell's room. When he checked, Caldwell was asleep. The sound stopped. I read those entries 3 times. Then I called Renly. There's something in the file, I said. The guards heard it too. The next morning, we went back to Caldwell's house. He was sitting on the porch when we arrived, as if he'd been expecting us. You found the logs, he said. It wasn't a question. The guards reported sounds, the same kind you described. He nodded. They heard it. They didn't understand what they were hearing, but they heard it. What is it, Mr. Caldwell? What's making these sounds? He was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the bare trees, making a sound like whispers. I don't know, he finally said. I've spent 37 years trying to figure that out. I thought if I ran far enough, if I stayed quiet enough, it would leave me alone. But it didn't. It's still there. It's always been there. Where? He pointed at the house. Inside. In the walls. In the floors. In the spaces between things. It lives in the silence. And when the silence gets deep enough, it speaks. We searched the house that afternoon, with Caldwell's permission. Starks went through it methodically, room by room, looking for anything that might explain the sounds. Faulty wiring, plumbing issues, animal infestations. She found nothing. The house was old but solid, well-maintained, unremarkable. But in the basement, she found something else. It was a small room, hidden behind a shelf of canning jars. The shelf swung open on hinges to reveal a door, and behind the door was a space about 8 feet square. Inside were filing cabinets, dozens of them, stuffed with papers. "Mr. Caldwell," Starks called, "can you come down here?" He descended the stairs slowly, gripping the railing. When he saw the open door, he stopped. "You found it," he said. "What is this?" "My research." We spent the next 3 hours going through the cabinets. The papers were a mix of newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, printed articles, photographs. All of them related to a single subject, unexplained sounds. Caldwell had been documenting cases from around the world. The hum in Taos, New Mexico, the sky trumpets in Kiev, the bloop recorded by NOAA hydrophones in the Pacific. Hundreds of reports spanning decades, all describing sounds that couldn't be explained. He'd organized them by date, by location, by frequency. He'd drawn connections between them, mapped patterns, developed theories. "You've been studying this," I said. "I've been trying to understand it. What it is, where it comes from, why it chooses certain people." He paused. "Why it chose me. And what have you concluded?" He looked at me, and for a moment his expression was almost pitying. "That it's not a sound," he said. "Not really. It's a signal, a communication. Something is trying to talk to us, and when it finds someone who can hear it, it doesn't let go." That night, I lay in my motel room, staring at the ceiling. I could hear the wind outside, the occasional car passing on the road. Normal sounds, explicable sounds. But underneath them, at the edge of perception, I thought I heard something else. A low hum, almost too faint to register. A vibration in the air, in the walls, in the silence itself. I told myself it was nothing. Fatigue, suggestion, the power of Caldwell's story working on my imagination. But I didn't sleep, and the sound didn't stop. The next 3 days were a blur of interviews, research, and growing unease. We talked to Caldwell's neighbors such as they were. The nearest house was half a mile away. They described him as quiet, polite, reclusive. No one reported anything unusual. No one had heard any strange sounds. But when I asked specific questions, had they ever noticed their televisions turning on by themselves, their phones ringing with no one on the line, I got strange reactions, hesitations, glances away, the kind of responses that suggested they had noticed but didn't want to admit it. One woman, a farmer's wife in her 60s, finally said, "There are sounds out here you learn not to listen to. The wind plays tricks. You hear things that aren't there." "What kind of things?" She didn't answer. Meanwhile, Starks was processing the materials from Caldwell's basement, scanning documents, cataloging photographs. She'd become fascinated by his research, not because she believed it, but because of its rigor. Caldwell had approached the phenomenon like a scientist, systematic, methodical, evidence-based. Whatever he was experiencing, he'd spent decades trying to understand it. Renly, for his part, had become increasingly quiet. He spent hours reviewing Caldwell's notes, looking for patterns, trying to construct a psychological profile. On the third night, he came to my room with a troubled expression. I've been thinking about what he said, about the sound being a signal, a communication. And? What if he's right? Not literally, I don't mean something supernatural. But what if there's a phenomenon here that we don't understand? Infrasound, maybe, or some kind of electromagnetic interference. Something that affects perception, creates auditory hallucinations, induces paranoia. It would explain why Caldwell ran, why he's been hiding all these years, why he believes something is speaking to him. It would also explain why the guards heard it, I said. Exactly. They were in the same environment, exposed to the same stimulus. It was a reasonable theory, logical, grounded in known science. I wanted to believe it. But that night, something happened that made it harder to believe. I was in my room reviewing case notes when the television turned on. I hadn't touched the remote. I hadn't bumped the power button. The screen simply lit up, showing static, that familiar hiss and crackle, the snow of a dead channel. I reached for the remote and turned it off. 10 seconds later, it turned on again. I unplugged it from the wall. The screen went dark. I stood there for a moment, waiting. Nothing. Then I heard it. A sound coming from outside. Low, rhythmic, pulsing. Like a heartbeat, but slower, much slower. I went to the window and looked out. The parking lot was empty. The road was dark. There was nothing there. But the sound continued. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. The ground, the sky, the air itself. A vibration that I felt in my chest, in my teeth, in the bones of my skull. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes, maybe. The sound held me, pinned me in place, filled my head until there was no room for anything else. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no traffic, no ambient noise at all, just emptiness. I stepped back from the window. My hands were shaking. The next morning, I didn't mention it to Starks or Renly. I told myself it was nothing. A truck passing on a distant highway. Some industrial machinery operating in the next county. There were explanations. There were always explanations. But when we arrived at Caldwell's house that day, he took one look at me and said, "You heard it." I didn't respond. "It's getting closer," he said. "It knows you're here. It knows you're listening." "I'm not listening to anything." He almost smiled. That's what I said, in the beginning. We had planned to continue the interviews that day, to press Caldwell for more details about his disappearance, his journey south, his decision to hide in Millbrook. But something had changed. The dynamic had shifted. Caldwell was no longer the subject of the investigation. He was something else, a guide, a warning. "I want to show you something," he said. He led us out of the house, across the yard, into the fields beyond. We walked for about 10 minutes, following a path that wound through dead grass and bare trees. The sky was overcast, heavy with the threat of rain. We arrived at a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a circle, not drawn or marked, but worn into the ground. A ring where the grass didn't grow, where the earth was hard and bare. "This is where I hear it loudest," Caldwell said. "Every night, around 3 a.m., the sound comes from here. I've measured it, I've recorded it. But when I play back the recordings, there's nothing there. Just silence." "Then how do you know you're hearing anything?" Starks asked. Caldwell looked at her. "Because when I'm standing here in this spot, I can feel it, in my body, in my mind. It's not just a sound, it's a presence." Renly crouched down and examined the circle. The soil was compacted, dry, different from the earth around it. He took samples, bagged them for analysis. "What do you think made this?" I asked. Caldwell shook his head. "I don't know. It was here when I bought the property. The previous owner didn't mention it. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he didn't want to know. We stood in the clearing for a while longer. The wind picked up, moving through the trees, making sounds that could have been anything. Whispers, warnings, nothing at all. That night, I made a decision. I told Starks and Renly that I was going to stay at the clearing. I was going to wait until 3 a.m. I was going to hear what Caldwell heard. "That's not a good idea," Renly said. "Probably not. You're chasing a delusion. Caldwell's been alone out here for decades. He's created a mythology around his own mental illness. If you go out there, you're validating it. Or I'm investigating it." Renly didn't argue further, but his expression made clear what he thought. At 2:30 a.m., I walked to the clearing. The sky was clear, full of stars. The air was cold and still. I sat down at the edge of the circle, facing the center, and waited. For a while, there was nothing. Just the silence of a rural night. The occasional rustle of an animal in the grass. The distant call of an owl. Then, gradually, the silence changed. It deepened. It became not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something else, a density, a weight. And then I heard it. It started low, at the edge of hearing. A hum, a vibration, a frequency that seemed to come from the ground beneath me. It rose slowly, building, layering on itself, until it wasn't one sound, but many. A chord, a harmony, a pattern that was almost like music, but not quite. I don't know how to describe what I felt. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was recognition. Like hearing a voice you've known all your life, speaking words you've always known but never spoken. The sound reached a peak and held there. I felt it in my chest, in my throat, in the space behind my eyes. I felt it asking me something, waiting for a response. I opened my mouth, and the sound stopped. The silence came back, sudden and absolute. I sat there, gasping, my heart pounding. I didn't know what had happened. I didn't know what I'd almost done. When I got back to the motel, it was almost 5 a.m. Starks and Renly were waiting in my room, worried. I told them what I'd heard. I told them what I'd felt. Renly listened without expression. When I finished, he said, "You experienced an infrasonic event. Probably geological. There are fault lines in this region. Infrasound can induce feelings of dread, disorientation, even hallucinations. It explains everything. Caldwell's experiences, the guard's reports, what you heard tonight." It was a good explanation. Rational, comforting. I wanted to believe it, but I remembered the moment when the sound had stopped. The moment when I'd opened my mouth to respond. And I knew that Renly was wrong. Whatever I'd heard in that clearing wasn't a geological phenomenon. It was a question, and it was still waiting for an answer. We stayed in Millbrook for another week. Officially, we were completing our investigation, documenting Caldwell's current location, assessing his mental state, determining whether to reopen the original case. Unofficially, I was trying to understand what I'd experienced in the clearing, what it meant, what it wanted. Caldwell was cooperative, even eager. He seemed relieved that someone finally believed him, or at least that someone was willing to listen. "It's been so long," he said one afternoon, sitting on his porch, looking out at the fields. "So long since I talked to anyone about this. I started to think I really was crazy, that I'd imagined all of it. But you kept researching, kept documenting. What else was I going to do? I couldn't go back. I couldn't move forward. All I could do was try to understand. And did you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I understand more than I did. I understand that it's not random. It chooses people. It finds people who can hear it, and then it attaches, follows. It wants something from us. It's been trying to communicate for a very long time, and we're just now starting to listen. What does it want? He looked at me. I think it wants to be known. I think it's been there, in the silence, in the spaces between sounds, and it's alone, and it's reaching out, trying to make contact. And when it does, when someone finally answers, Caldwell didn't reply. He just turned back to the fields, and I saw something in his eyes that might have been fear, or loneliness, or both. On our last night in Millbrook, I went back to the clearing. I didn't tell Starks or Renly. I knew what they would say, but I needed to hear it again. I needed to know if it was real or if I'd imagined it, or if it was something in between, a phenomenon I didn't have the framework to understand. The night was clear and cold. I walked through the fields in darkness, following the path I'd memorized. The stars were bright, the Milky Way visible overhead. It was beautiful, and it was silent. I reached the clearing and sat down in the circle. The ground was cold beneath me. I closed my eyes and waited. The sound came faster this time. Not gradually, but all at once, a wave of vibration that rolled through me, filled me, surrounded me. It was louder than before, more complex, more insistent. It wasn't just asking anymore, it was telling. I don't know how to explain what I experienced. It wasn't words, it wasn't images. It was something more fundamental than that. A transfer of meaning, direct and unmediated. I understood things I couldn't have known. The shape of the universe, the weight of time, the emptiness between stars. And I understood that Caldwell was right. Something was there, in the silence. Something vast and old and desperately, achingly alone. It had been reaching out for longer than I could comprehend, searching for anyone who could hear it. And when it found someone, when it finally made contact, it held on. Because contact was all it had. I don't know how long I sat there. When the sound finally stopped, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten. I walked back to the motel in a daze, my mind full of things I couldn't articulate, things I wasn't sure I should articulate. Starks and Renly were packing when I arrived. We were scheduled to fly back to Salt Lake City that afternoon. "Where were you?" Starks asked. "Walking?" Clearing my head. She looked at me for a moment. She knew, but she didn't say anything. We stopped at Caldwell's house on our way out of town. He was waiting on the porch, as always. He looked at me, and I saw recognition in his eyes. "You heard it again?" "Yes." "Did you answer?" I didn't respond. He nodded, as if my silence was answer enough. "It won't stop. Now that it knows you can hear it, it will keep calling. Every night, in the silence, it will wait for you." "What happens if I answer?" He was quiet for a long time, then, "I don't know. I've never been brave enough to find out." We shook hands. I got in the car. As we drove away, I watched him in the rearview mirror, standing on his porch, growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared. The flight back was uneventful. I filed my report the next day, factual, restrained, leaving out the details that couldn't be explained or verified. Marcus Caldwell had been located. He was alive, living under an assumed name, and had been for 37 years. His mental state was stable but suggested possible delusional disorder. Recommendation: no further action at this time. The case was closed, again. But it didn't close for me. Every night, in my apartment in Salt Lake City, in the silence after midnight, I hear it. The hum, the vibration, the question. I've tried to ignore it. I've tried sleeping with music on, with the television, with any noise that will fill the space. But the sound comes through. It's always there, beneath everything else, waiting. Caldwell was right. It attaches. It follows. It wants to be heard. I've started researching, just like he did. I've found reports from around the world, people who hear sounds they can't explain, frequencies that shouldn't exist, signals from nowhere. We're not alone in this. There are others. And I've started to wonder, what happens if we all answer? What happens if we all respond at the same time, and the thing in the silence finally gets what it wants? I don't know. I'm not sure I want to know. But last night, for the first time, I opened my mouth. I shaped a word. I almost spoke. The sound stopped the moment before I did. It retreated, pulling back, waiting. It's patient. It's been waiting for a long time. It can wait a little longer, but I don't know how much longer I can. There's a folder in my desk now, marked with a red tab. It's full of clippings, notes, photographs. The beginning of my own research, my own documentation. I know how this looks. I know what Renly would say, what Starks would think. I know what the rational explanation is. But I also know what I heard. I know what I felt. I know that something is out there, in the silence, trying to make contact. And I know that soon, maybe soon, I'm going to answer. Time isn't as solid as we think it is. We build our lives on it. Schedules, deadlines, anniversaries, the comforting tick of seconds into minutes, into hours. But underneath all that structure, time is fluid, slippery, unreliable. We pretend it moves in one direction, at one speed, but that's just a story we tell ourselves to keep from going mad. I learned that in the Whitmore Forest. I learned that some places don't follow the same rules as everywhere else. And I learned that some moments, once you step into them, don't let you step out. My name is Lachlan Vance. I'm a behavioral analyst with the FBI, assigned to the Behavioral Analysis Unit at Quantico, Virginia. My job is to understand how people think, specifically, how killers think. I construct profiles, interpret crime scenes, predict patterns of behavior. It's a discipline built on logic, evidence, the assumption that human actions follow comprehensible rules. For 15 years, that assumption held. I've profiled serial murderers, mass shooters, domestic terrorists, child abductors. I've looked into the darkest corners of the human mind and found patterns there. Explanations, reasons. Then I caught the Whitmore case, and everything I thought I knew about patterns and explanations dissolved like morning fog. The call came in early November, on a morning cold enough to see my breath in the parking garage at Quantico. The sky was the color of wet concrete, and a thin wind cut through my coat as I walked to my car. I was thinking about a case I'd just closed. A string of murders in rural Pennsylvania that had turned out to be a family affair. 3 generations of violence hidden behind a respectable farmhouse facade. Standard darkness. Comprehensible evil. My phone buzzed. A message from my supervisor, a terse man named Harlan Greaves, who communicated primarily in forwarded emails and one-sentence directives. This time, the message included a note. Unusual circumstances. Might be your kind of thing. Coming from Greaves, that was practically a personal invitation. The case originated in rural Oregon, a stretch of forested land between Bend and Lapine, called the Whitmore Wilderness Area. 3 days earlier, a hiker had been found dead in a clearing about 2 miles from the nearest maintained trail. Male, early 40s, no identification on his person. Cause of death appeared to be exposure, dehydration and hypothermia, the slow killers that take people who get lost in the backcountry and can't find their way out. But the county medical examiner had flagged several anomalies that didn't fit that straightforward diagnosis. She hadn't specified what those anomalies were. She'd simply requested FBI assistance with what she called interpretive challenges. I read the preliminary file on my tablet while I waited for my flight at Reagan National. The details were sparse. The body had been discovered by a trail runner who'd gone off-path to relieve himself. The man was lying on his back in a small clearing, arms at his sides, eyes open. No signs of struggle, no obvious injuries, no indication of how he'd gotten there or why he'd stayed. He looked peaceful, according to the initial report, like he'd just laid down and decided to stop living. But peaceful deaths don't usually prompt requests for FBI assistance. I flew into Redmond Municipal Airport in Central Oregon and picked up a rental car, a sturdy SUV with four-wheel drive, appropriate for the terrain. Then I drove south through pine forests and ancient lava fields, following Route 97 as it wound through a landscape that felt prehistoric. Oregon, in November, is stark and uncompromising. Gray skies, bare branches, the occasional dusting of snow on higher elevations, the mountains, the Cascades to the west, the high desert to the east, stood sentinel in the distance, indifferent to human concerns. I passed through Bend, a town of craft breweries and outdoor gear shops that catered to skiers and hikers. Then the landscape emptied out. Fewer buildings, fewer cars, more space between everything. The ponderosa pines grew taller and more numerous, their red bark glowing faintly in the flat afternoon light. By the time I reached Lapine, the sun was already sinking toward the tree line, and the temperature had dropped into the low 40s. La Pine was barely a town. A scattering of buildings along the highway, a few gas stations, a hardware store, a diner with a hand-painted sign. The Deschutes County Sheriff's Office was a low, functional building on the eastern edge of the settlement, surrounded by pickup trucks and patrol vehicles with mud-splattered fenders. Inside, I was greeted by a deputy who introduced himself as my liaison, a young man named Arden Kellick, recently promoted from patrol, eager to prove himself on a case that actually mattered. He had sandy hair, an earnest face, and the energetic handshake of someone who hadn't yet learned that enthusiasm doesn't solve cases. Sometimes it just makes them harder. "Agent Vance," he said, pumping my hand with a little too much vigor. "We really appreciate you coming all the way out here. This one's got everyone rattled. Walk me through it." He did. We sat in a small conference room with a whiteboard on one wall and a window overlooking the parking lot on the other. Kellick had printed out maps, crime scene photos, the preliminary autopsy notes. He'd done his homework. I appreciated that. "The victim was found here," he said, pointing to a location on the topographic map. "About 2 miles northeast of the Paulina Creek trailhead. It's not on any maintained trail. You have to bushwhack through some pretty dense forest to get there." The guy who found him, a local runner named Pete Darnell, said he'd never been to that spot before. Said he doesn't know how the victim could have gotten there either. There's no easy route in. And no easy route out. Right, so how did a guy with no gear, no pack, no water bottle end up 2 miles into the backcountry and die of exposure? It was a good question, one of many. What do we know about the victim? Not much. Male, white, early 40s. Average height, average build, no distinguishing marks. He was wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, a light jacket, not the kind of clothes you'd wear for a hike this time of year. No wallet, no phone, no ID, just a watch and a wedding ring. The watch was stopped? Kellick looked at me with surprise. "How'd you know that?" "It's in the file. The ME noted it." "Oh, right. Yeah, the watch was stopped at 3:47. We don't know if that's AM or PM. The ME thought it might be significant, but..." He shrugged. I made a note. Stopped watches weren't unusual in exposure cases. Batteries die, mechanisms fail in cold weather. But something about the detail nagged at me. What about the anomalies the ME flagged? I asked. The interpretive challenges? Kellick's expression shifted. He looked uncomfortable. She said she'd rather show you herself. She's at her clinic in town. I can take you there whenever you're ready. I'm ready now. The medical examiner's office was in a small clinic on the outskirts of Lapine, a converted house with a sign out front that read, Deschutes County Coroner. Inside, it smelled like disinfectant and coffee. A woman in her late 50s met us in the front room. She had silver hair pulled back in a practical knot, weathered skin, and the steady gaze of someone who'd spent decades looking at things most people couldn't stomach. Agent Vance, she said, extending her hand. I'm Dr. Marin O'Shea. Thank you for coming. Your message was intriguing. Interpretive challenges doesn't usually make it into autopsy notes. She almost smiled. No, it doesn't. Come with me. She led us to the examination room in the back of the building. It was small but well equipped. Stainless steel table, bright overhead lights, a wall of drawers where the bodies were kept. She pulled one of the drawers open and slid out the tray. The man lying there was exactly as Kellick had described. Middle-aged, average build, no distinguishing features. He looked like anyone. He looked like no one. His skin had the waxy pallor of the recently dead, and his eyes were closed now, though they'd been open when he was found. Cause of death is listed as exposure, Dr. O'Shea said. Dehydration and hypothermia. The pathology is consistent. Organ damage, tissue breakdown, the usual markers. By all standard metrics, this man died because he was lost in the woods without water or shelter for an extended period. How extended? That's where it gets complicated. She moved to the man's hands and lifted one gently. Look at the fingernails. I looked. The nails were long. Not just overdue for a trim, but grown out significantly, extending several millimeters past the fingertips. Fingernails grow at a rate of approximately 3.5 millimeters per month, Dr. O'Shea said. Based on this growth, I'd estimate this man was alive and unable to care for himself, unable to trim his nails, at minimum, for at least 2 to 3 months. But you said he died of exposure. That takes days, not months. I know. She set the hand down carefully. That's interpretive challenge number 1. She moved to the torso. Challenge number 2. Lividity and rigor mortis are consistent with the position he was found in. Time of death, based on standard indicators, was approximately 72 hours before discovery. So, according to those metrics, he's been dead for 3 days. But according to the nails, he was incapacitated for months. Correct. She lifted the sheet slightly, exposing the man's abdomen. Challenge number 3. I examined his stomach contents, or rather, the lack of them. His entire digestive system is empty, not just of food, but of bile, bacteria, the normal residue of a functioning gut. It's as if he hadn't eaten or digested anything in weeks. Weeks before he died? Or weeks total? I can't tell, that's the problem. She replaced the sheet. And then there's this. She moved to a workbench along the wall and picked up a printout. I ran a carbon-14 test on his tissue samples, just to be thorough. The results are anomalous. I took the printout. The numbers meant nothing to me. I'm not a scientist, but her expression told me enough. The carbon-14 levels in his cellular material are off, she said. According to this test, the tissue in his body is approximately 6 months older than it should be. 6 months? Based on the decay rate of the isotope, yes. It's as if his cells experienced 6 months of time between when he was last normal and when he died. I stared at the printout. That's not possible. I know. Dr. O'Shea took the paper back. I ran it twice. Same result. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I've been doing this for 30 years, Agent Vance. I've seen a lot of strange things. Bodies in unusual conditions, deaths that didn't make sense at first. But I've always found an explanation eventually. Science always provides one. And this time? She shook her head slowly. This time, I don't have one. The physical evidence is internally contradictory. The timelines don't match. It's as if... She paused, searching for words. It's as if different parts of him experienced time differently. I stood there, looking at the body, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. A man who'd died in 3 days but aged 6 months. Whose nails grew for weeks while his stomach stayed empty. Whose watch stopped at 3:47 for no apparent reason. I need to see where he was found, I said. The hike to the clearing took about 90 minutes. Kellogg led the way, following a route he'd marked on his GPS. The forest was dense, mostly ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, with an understory of manzanita and bitterbrush that grabbed at our legs as we pushed through. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of fallen needles that muffled our footsteps. The air smelled like resin and cold earth. It was the kind of forest that swallowed sound. We didn't talk much, just the crunch of our boots, the occasional snap of a branch, the distant call of a raven. The deeper we went, the more the outside world seemed to recede. No traffic noise, no airplanes overhead, nothing to remind you that civilization existed. Just trees and sky and the growing sense of isolation. After about 40 minutes, we began to descend into a shallow valley. The trees grew closer together here, their branches interlacing overhead. The light dimmed, filtering through the canopy in pale, dusty shafts. Then the trees opened up, and we were there. The clearing was small, maybe 30 feet across, roughly circular, open to the sky. The trees surrounding it were old, their trunks massive, their bark furrowed with age. They stood like sentinels, watching. In the center of the clearing was a depression in the ground, shallow but distinct, shaped roughly like a human body. "That's where we found him," Kellogg said. "Right in the middle, lying on his back, arms at his sides, eyes open." I walked the perimeter of the clearing slowly, scanning the ground for anything out of place. Footprints, broken branches, disturbed earth. But there was nothing. The pine needles were undisturbed except for the area around the depression. No trail leading in or out. No sign of a campsite, a pack, any indication of how the man had gotten here. "You canvassed the surrounding area?" I asked. "Best we could. It's a lot of ground to cover, and the terrain is rough. But we didn't find anything. No vehicle, no gear, no secondary site. It's like he just appeared here." I crouched near the depression, studying the shape. The man had lain here for days, dying slowly, getting weaker, unable to move. What had he seen? What had he heard? What had he been thinking in those final hours? And then I noticed something. My watch had stopped. I looked at my wrist. The digital display was frozen. 3:47. I tapped the face. Nothing. I pressed the buttons on the side. Nothing. The screen didn't flicker, didn't reset. It was just frozen, stuck, as if time itself had stopped moving. "Kellogg," I said. "What time is it?" He checked his phone. 2:15. I looked at my watch again, still 3:47. "Check your watch." He looked confused, but he glanced at his wrist. He was wearing a digital Casio, the kind with the black rubber strap and the square face. His expression changed. "It stopped," he said. "What time?" 3:47. We stood there in the clearing in the silence, and I felt something I hadn't felt on a case in a long time. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the recognition that I was out of my depth, that the rules I relied on, the logical, evidentiary rules of behavioral analysis, might not apply here. Something was wrong with this place, something fundamental. "Let's go," I said. "I've seen enough." We hiked back to the trailhead as the sun began to set, the shadows lengthening between the trees. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. Our watches stayed frozen the entire way, stuck at 3:47, unresponsive to any input. When we reached the parking lot, I checked my watch again. It was working. The display showed 4:52 p.m., the correct time, updating normally. I looked at Kellick. He was staring at his wrist with the same expression. "Did that just start working again?" he asked. "Yeah. Mine too." He looked at me. What the hell was that? I didn't have an answer, but I knew it meant something. 3:47. The same time the dead man's watch had stopped. That night, in my motel room in Lapine, I spread out the case files and tried to construct a profile. It's my default mode. Take the evidence, interpret the behavior, build a picture of who did what and why. Even when the case isn't a typical violent crime, the process helps me think. But this case resisted profiling. There was no clear perpetrator, no clear motive, no clear narrative. Just a dead man in a clearing, with a body that contradicted itself. I made lists. I drew diagrams. I wrote out timelines and then crossed them out because the timelines didn't make sense. What I knew: male victim, early 40s, no ID, he died of exposure, dehydration, hypothermia. Body showed signs of prolonged incapacitation, nail growth, 2 to 3 months. Digestive system empty, weeks without food. Cellular material aged. 6 months beyond expected. Time of death, 3 days before discovery. Watch stopped at 3:47. Found in remote clearing with no trail access. My watch and Kellick's watch stopped at 3:47 in the clearing. What I didn't know: everything else. Around midnight, I gave up on the profile and started researching the location instead. The Whitmore Wilderness area was federal land, managed by the Forest Service, with limited public access. Few trails, no campgrounds, no facilities. It had been named after a local family, the Whitmores, who had owned the land before it was transferred to the government in the 1960s. I searched for any historical incidents in the area. Disappearances, accidents, anything unusual. The results were sparse. A few lost hikers over the decades, most of them found. A hunter who'd fallen into a ravine in 988. Nothing that suggested a pattern. Then I found something interesting. In 1987, a research team from Oregon State University had conducted a study in the Whitmore Wilderness area. The project was described as atmospheric monitoring, measuring air quality, particulate levels, that sort of thing. The study had lasted 6 months, then ended abruptly. No final report was filed. The funding was terminated without explanation. I made a note. In the morning, I'd find out who was on that team. But first, I had to sleep. And when I finally did, I dreamed of the clearing. I dreamed I was standing at the edge, looking in, and the trees were leaning toward me, reaching, their branches like fingers. And in the center of the clearing, in the depression where the dead man had lain, something was moving. Something was waking up. I opened my eyes at 3:47 a.m. The room was silent. The clock on the nightstand glowed red in the darkness. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to nothing. Then I got up and started working again. The next morning, I asked Kellick to pull records on the 1987 research project. He made calls to Oregon State, to the Forest Service, to county archives. By noon, he had a name: Dr. Eleanor Whitmore. She'd been the lead researcher on the atmospheric monitoring study. The wilderness area was named after her family. Her grandfather had owned the land, and her father had donated it to the federal government decades ago. "Is she still alive?" I asked. "Records show she's in a care facility in Bend, Pinewood Assisted Living. She's 87 years old. Can we see her?" Kellick made the call. The facility said yes, with the caveat that Dr. Whitmore was in the memory care unit. She had dementia, they told us. Her lucid periods were becoming less frequent. There was no guarantee she'd be able to help us. We drove to Bend that afternoon. The care facility was a modern building with large windows, landscaped grounds, and the careful cheerfulness of places designed to make dying comfortable. The staff was friendly but cautious. They led us to Dr. Whitmore's room on the second floor, reminding us to be patient, to speak clearly, to not press too hard if she became confused. She was sitting in a chair by the window when we entered, looking out at the mountains. She was small and frail, her white hair thin and wispy, her hands spotted with age. But when we introduced ourselves and mentioned the Whitmore Wilderness area, something changed in her eyes. A flicker of recognition, or maybe warning. "You were there," she said. Her voice was thin but surprisingly clear. "In my forest." "We're investigating a death that occurred there," I said. "A man was found in a clearing about 2 miles from the main trail. We're trying to understand what happened to him." She was quiet for a moment. Her gaze drifted back to the window, then returned to me. "The clearing, the round one, with the old trees. You know it?" "I know all of them." She shifted in her chair, wincing slightly. "I spent years in that forest, walking, measuring, listening." A pause, trying to understand. "Understand what, Dr. Whitmore?" She looked at me with those cloudy eyes, and I saw something behind them. Intelligence, intensity. A mind still working despite the fog of age and illness. "Time," she said. I was trying to understand time. Over the next hour, in fragments and tangents and looping digressions, she told us about her research. In 1987, her team had set up monitoring equipment throughout the Whitmore Wilderness area. Sensors to measure temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, electromagnetic fields. Standard environmental research. But almost immediately, they'd noticed anomalies. The instruments would contradict each other, she said. A thermometer in one location would show a different reading than one 50 feet away. Barometers would spike for no reason. And the clocks... She shook her head. The clocks were the worst. What happened with the clocks? They wouldn't agree. We'd synchronize them in the morning, and by afternoon, they'd be off. Sometimes by minutes, sometimes by hours. We thought it was equipment failure at first. We replaced everything, every instrument, every clock. Same results. "So you started mapping?" I said. She nodded slowly. "We wanted to find the pattern, where the anomalies were strongest, where time moved differently." "And did you find it?" "Yes." Her hands, resting in her lap, trembled slightly. "There are places in that forest where time doesn't flow the same way. We called them pockets. Little zones where the rate is different. Faster, usually, sometimes slower. Most of them are small. You can walk through one in a few steps and not even notice. But some of them..." She trailed off. "The clearing," I said. "The one where we found the body. That's the strongest one, the center of it all." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "I told them not to go there. I told them it was dangerous, but Thomas didn't listen." "Thomas?" "One of my graduate students, young man, very smart, very confident. He wanted to set up a sensor in the clearing, get readings from the heart of the anomaly. I told him no. He went anyway." She was quiet for a moment. He was gone for an hour. Howdy he. When he came back, what happened? He'd aged. The words came out flat, matter of fact, as if she were describing the weather. Not much. A few weeks, maybe a month. His hair was longer. He had a beard he hadn't had before. He didn't remember any of it. He thought he'd been gone for an hour. I sat back in my chair. I looked at Kellick. His face was pale. "What did you do?" I asked. We ended the study, packed up the equipment, left. She folded her hands tighter. The university wanted a final report. I couldn't write one. How do you explain something like that? They'd think I was crazy. So I just stopped. And Thomas? What happened to him? He left the program, moved away. I don't know where he went. A pause. He was frightened. We all were. I processed this. A story from almost 40 years ago, told by a woman with dementia. It could be confabulation, false memory, the mind filling in gaps with invented details. But it matched what I'd seen. The body aging faster than it should. The watches stopping in the clearing. The sense, impossible to articulate, but impossible to ignore, that something was fundamentally wrong with time in that place. "Dr. Whitmore," I said carefully. "The man we found in the clearing. Is it possible he got caught in one of these pockets? That he experienced months of time while only days passed outside?" She looked at me for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not just possible, it's certain." She leaned forward slightly. "That clearing is the heart of it, the strongest pocket in the forest. If he was there, he felt every second of those months, every hour of hunger and thirst and cold, alone, unable to leave, unable to escape. Why couldn't he leave? Because time was moving too fast. Every step he took toward the edge, the forest around him had already changed. The landmarks shifted. The path he came in on didn't exist anymore. He was trapped in his own moment, watching the world move without him. I thought about that. A man walking in circles, trying to escape, while his body aged and his strength faded. Dying of exposure in 3 days that felt like 6 months. "Is there any way to close these pockets?" I asked. "To stop it from happening again?" Dr. Whitmore shook her head slowly. "I don't even know what causes them, something about that place. The geology, the magnetism, the shape of the land itself. It's been there longer than we have, longer than anyone." She looked back out the window. "It'll be there after we're gone." We thanked her and stood to leave. At the door, she called out, "Agent Vance?" I turned. "Be careful," she said. That forest knows when someone is listening, and once it knows, it doesn't let go. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and left. In the car, driving back to Lapine, Kellick was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "You believe her?" "I don't know what I believe. But I believe something happened to that man that standard forensics can't explain." "So, what do we do?" I thought about the clearing, the stopped watches, the feeling of wrongness. "We go back," I said, "and we figure out what we're dealing with." Back at the motel, I took a long, hot shower, trying to shake the chill that had settled into my bones. But the cold wouldn't leave. It wasn't physical, it was something else. A wrongness that had gotten inside me and wouldn't let go. I thought about calling Greaves, telling him what we'd seen. But what would I say? My watch stopped in the forest? There's something wrong with time out there? He'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I ordered food from the diner across the street. A burger, fries, coffee. But when it arrived, I couldn't eat. I just sat at the table, staring at the plate, thinking about the clearing. About Gerald Sutton, about all the questions I couldn't answer. Who was he? How had he ended up there? Had he walked in by accident, or had something drawn him in? And the biggest question of all, why had his watch stopped at 3:47? Why had mine? Why that specific moment? There had to be a reason. There's always a reason. That's what my training told me. Human behavior follows patterns. Events have causes. Even the strangest things can be explained if you look hard enough. But what if that wasn't true? What if some things existed outside the realm of explanation? What if some patterns didn't lead anywhere? That night, I sat in my motel room and tried to construct a theory. Not a psychological profile. This wasn't a behavioral case. Not in any traditional sense. It was something else. A phenomenon, an anomaly, something that existed outside the framework I'd spent my career building. I made a new list. What I knew, time moves differently in certain locations within the Whitmore Wilderness area. These pockets can cause accelerated aging in biological organisms. Electronic devices malfunction within pockets. Specifically, they stop at 3:47. The victim was trapped in the central pocket, the clearing, and died of exposure. The phenomenon has existed for at least 40 years, possibly longer. What I didn't know, what causes the pockets? Why 3:47 specifically? Who the victim was? How he got to the clearing? Whether there are other victims? The last question troubled me most. If the clearing was a trap, a place where time moved so fast that escape was impossible, then the man we'd found might not be the first. There could be others, over decades, over centuries. I asked Kellick to pull missing person reports for the region going back as far as records existed. Anyone who'd disappeared in or near the Whitmore Wilderness area. It was a long shot. Most of those cases would have conventional explanations. But I needed to know. He came back with a list the next day. 12 names over 5 decades. Hikers, hunters, campers, a couple of drifters passing through. Most had been found eventually. Lost, injured, occasionally deceased from falls or animal attacks. Normal tragedies with normal causes. But 3 had never been found. They'd vanished without a trace. I looked at the dates. 1973, 91, 2008. Pull the files on these 3, I said. The files arrived that afternoon. They were thin, incomplete investigations that had run out of leads. But there was enough information to see a pattern. All 3 victims had been alone. All 3 had last been seen near the Whitmore Wilderness area. All 3 had disappeared in late autumn, when the days were short and the nights were cold. And in the 1991 file, a man named Gerald Sutton, age 38, last seen hiking near Paulina Lake, there was a note from the search team leader. During the search, his team had experienced unexplained equipment malfunctions in a clearing approximately 2 miles northeast of the main trail. Compasses spun erratically. Radios produced nothing but static. Watches stopped. At 3:47, I read the note 3 times. Then I closed the file and looked at Kellick. I need to see the body again, I said. We drove to Dr. O'Shea's clinic. She was waiting for us, as if she'd known we were coming. You found something, she said. Maybe? Can I see his personal effects? She led me to the storage room where the evidence was kept. The victim's belongings were in a clear plastic bag. Clothes, shoes, watch, ring. Standard items, unremarkable. I took out the watch. It was a simple analog model, inexpensive, the kind you'd buy at a drugstore. The crystal was scratched but intact. The hands were frozen at 3:47. I turned it over, and there on the back, engraved in small neat letters, G.S. Gerald Sutton, the man who'd disappeared in 1991. He's been in that clearing for over 30 years, I said quietly. Experiencing accelerated time. He died 3 days ago, but for him, I did the math. Decades. He's been dying for decades. Dr. O'Shea stared at me. That's impossible. I know. I put the watch back in the bag. But it happened. I drove back to Lapine and pulled the Gerald Sutton file. I compared the photo from '91, a smiling man with brown hair and an open face, to the body in the clinic. The features matched, aged and weathered, but unmistakable. Gerald Sutton. Missing since November 1991. 33 years in a temporal pocket, experiencing accelerated time. Dying slowly, alone, unable to escape. And now, finally, found. I called Kellick and told him what I'd discovered. So the clearing has been there the whole time, he said. Trapping people, aging them, killing them. Yes. And there's nothing we can do to stop it? I thought about the question. I thought about Dr. Whitmore, 87 years old, still haunted by what she'd seen. I thought about her student Thomas, who'd walked into the clearing for an hour and come out a month older. We can warn people, I said. Close the area, mark it as hazardous. Make sure no one else wanders in by accident. But we can't close the pockets themselves. We can't fix it. No, I said, we can't fix it. That night, I started writing my report. I wrote down everything. The body, the anomalies, Dr. Whitmore's research, the stopped watches, the pattern of disappearances. I wrote a recommendation that the Whitmore Wilderness area be closed to public access immediately and indefinitely. But as I wrote, I kept thinking about the clearing. Kept seeing it in my mind. The tall trees, the depression in the center, the feeling of standing at the edge and looking in. And I realized I wasn't done. I needed to go back, one more time. At night, when 347 actually came, I needed to see what happened. I needed to understand. It wasn't rational, it wasn't safe. But I was going to do it anyway. I told Kellick my plan. He didn't like it. That's a terrible idea, he said. We were in the conference room at the sheriff's office, maps and files spread across the table. You saw what happened to Gerald Sutton. What if you get trapped in there too? I won't enter the clearing. I'll observe from the edge, document what I see, and will bring equipment that doesn't rely on local electronics. Satellite phones, GPS trackers, things that connect to systems outside the anomaly. You don't know that'll work. You don't know anything about how this thing operates. He was right, I didn't, but I was going anyway. I need to see it, I said. I need to understand what we're dealing with. Right now, all I have are theories and second-hand accounts. I need direct observation. Kellick was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm coming with you. You don't have to. Yeah, I do. He looked at me with an expression that was equal parts fear and determination. Someone needs to watch your back. Make sure you don't do something stupid. I almost smiled. Fair enough. We reached the trailhead at 4:30 p.m., with about an hour of daylight remaining. The forest was quiet. No wind, no bird song, just the silence of a world holding its breath. We hiked in fast, following the GPS route, our footsteps crunching on the carpet of needles. The clearing looked different in the fading light. The trees seemed taller, closer together, their branches more tangled. The open space in the center seemed smaller, more intimate, more like a trap. We stay at the edge, I said. We don't go in, no matter what. Kellick nodded. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. We positioned ourselves on opposite sides of the clearing about 20 feet apart, with clear sight lines to the center. The depression where Gerald Sutton had died was visible in the dim light, a shallow indent, the only mark on the otherwise pristine floor of needles. Then we waited. The sun went down. The forest darkened. Stars appeared overhead, bright and hard in the clear mountain air. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath, white clouds in the beam of my flashlight. 5:45 p.m., 6:30. Nothing happened. The clearing was still and silent. No movement, no sound, nothing. 7, 8, 9. The cold seeped in through my coat, my gloves, my boots. I shifted my weight, trying to keep my muscles from stiffening. Across the clearing, I could see Kellick's flashlight beam moving occasionally as he did the same. 10, 11. I started to wonder if we'd made a mistake. If whatever happened here was random, unpredictable, not tied to time of day. If we'd spend the whole night standing in the cold and see nothing. Midnight, 1 o'clock a.m., 2 o'clock. Then, at 3:15, I heard something. It started faint, at the very edge of perception. A sound coming from inside the clearing. Not wind, not animals, not any natural noise I could identify. It was more like a vibration, a low hum that I felt in my chest as much as heard with my ears. I looked at Kellick. He'd heard it too. His flashlight was pointed at the center of the clearing, the beam steady. The sound grew. It became a tone, a frequency, a presence that filled the air. And underneath it, woven through it, something else. A voice, human, male, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. The voice was distant at first, as if coming from far away, but it grew clearer, closer, more distinct. It was speaking in a rhythmic pattern, not quite conversation, not quite recitation, something in between, and then I realized what I was hearing. It was my voice. I was listening to myself speak, words I hadn't said, a conversation I hadn't had, but unmistakably, undeniably, my own voice echoing from the center of the clearing. "Agent Vance," the voice said. "This is my report on the Whitmore Wilderness Area investigation." I stood frozen. My heart was pounding. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. The voice continued. It described the case, the body, the anomalies, the interviews with Dr. O'Shea and Dr. Whitmore. It presented conclusions. It made recommendations. It was a formal report, delivered in a formal tone, exactly the kind of thing I would write and present to my supervisors. But I hadn't written it yet. I hadn't made those conclusions. I hadn't formulated those recommendations. The voice was reporting from a future that hadn't happened. "The clearing contains a localized temporal anomaly," the voice said. "Subjects exposed to the anomaly experience accelerated time relative to the external environment. The degree of acceleration correlates with proximity to the center of the clearing and duration of exposure. Prolonged exposure results in death by dehydration and hypothermia, as the subject's biological processes continue at an accelerated rate while they are unable to obtain food or water." The voice paused. Then it said, "Recommendation. The Whitmore Wilderness Area should be closed to public access immediately and indefinitely. The central clearing should be marked as a hazardous zone. No personnel should enter the clearing under any circumstances. Further research into the nature and cause of the anomaly is not recommended at this time." The voice stopped. The silence that followed was total. The hum faded, the vibration ceased, and the clearing was still again. Just the cold and the dark and the stars overhead. I stood there, unable to move. I'd just heard my own voice deliver a report I hadn't written yet. A report that summarized findings I hadn't made. A report from a future that, as far as I knew, hadn't occurred. "Kellick," I said. My voice came out hoarse. "I heard it." He sounded shaken. "That was you. That was your voice." "I know. But you didn't. You haven't. I know. We stood at the edge of the clearing, in the darkness, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Not my beliefs. Beliefs can change, can adapt to new evidence. This was deeper than that. This was my understanding of how reality worked, of what was possible. Because if the clearing could project future events backward, if it could capture something I would say and play it before I said it, then the rules I'd built my life on were wrong. Cause didn't precede effect. The future wasn't unwritten. Time wasn't a river flowing in one direction. Time was something else entirely. And I was standing at the edge of it. I checked my watch. The display was frozen. 3:47. We need to go, I said. We hiked out in the dark, not speaking, not stopping. The forest seemed different now, more alive, more aware. I kept feeling like something was watching us, like the trees had eyes. We hiked out in the dark, not speaking, not stopping. The forest seemed different now, more alive, more aware. I kept feeling like something was watching us from between the trees, like every shadow had eyes. The trail seemed longer than before, the distances stretched. I checked my GPS every few minutes, watching our progress, making sure we were going the right way. But even with the technology confirming our route, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were lost, that we'd taken a wrong turn somewhere and were now wandering in circles. Kellick must have felt it too. At one point he stopped and looked around, his flashlight beam sweeping through the darkness. "This doesn't look right," he said. "We're on the trail. GPS confirms it." "I know, but it doesn't." He trailed off. I knew what he meant. The forest felt wrong. The trees seemed too close, the darkness too thick, the silence too absolute. We were on the right path, but the path itself had changed. We kept walking, one foot in front of the other, eyes forward. Don't look back. When we finally emerged at the trailhead, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The parking lot was empty except for our car. The road was dark and quiet, but it felt like civilization. It felt like safety. When we reached the parking lot, our watches started working again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the table in my motel room and wrote down everything I could remember from the voice in the clearing. Every word, every phrase, every conclusion and recommendation. It was my voice. It was my report. It was accurate, as far as I could tell, to what I had observed and what I was thinking. But I hadn't written it yet. I stared at my notes. If the clearing could project the future backward, then what I'd heard was a prediction, a glimpse of what would happen, which meant the case would end. I would write the report. The area would be closed. But it also meant something else, something that made my skin crawl. It meant the future was already determined. It meant my choices, my actions, my decisions. They were all just steps in a pattern that had already been completed. It meant that whatever I did, I would end up in the same place, saying the same words, reaching the same conclusions. Was that true? Was choice an illusion? Or was there another explanation? Was the voice not a prediction, but a possibility? One future among many, shaped by the choices I'd made so far, but not locked in. I didn't know. I couldn't know. The evidence wasn't sufficient. But I knew one thing. The clearing had spoken to me. It had shown me something it wanted me to see, and I didn't understand why. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. I wrote my report, not all of it, not the final version, but a preliminary draft. I coordinated with the Forest Service to initiate the closure process. I arranged for Gerald Sutton's remains to be returned to his family. I tied up the loose ends of the case. But the whole time, I kept thinking about the voice in the clearing, kept hearing it in my head. kept wondering what it meant. On the fourth day, Kellick came to me with a strange expression. "I went back," he said. "Back where?" "The clearing, last night, alone." I stared at him. "I told you not to do that." "I know." But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had to see it again. I had to know if it would happen to me, too. "And?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, I heard a voice. My voice. Saying things I haven't said yet. "What things?" He looked at me, and I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. "I heard myself calling you, telling you that you had to come back, that you'd missed something, that there was something in the clearing you hadn't found yet." My blood went cold. "That call hasn't happened," I said. "I know, but I heard it, every word." I sat down. I tried to think if Kellick had heard a future conversation, a conversation where he told me I needed to return, then the case wasn't over. Something was still out there. Something I'd missed. Or else the clearing was playing with us, showing us fragments of possible futures to manipulate our behavior, drawing us back. "I'm not going back," I said. "I know." Kellick paused. "But I think you will, eventually. I think that's what it wants." I didn't respond. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark. The motel was quiet. There was nothing to hear but the hum of the heater and the occasional car passing on the road outside. But underneath those sounds, at the very edge of perception, I thought I heard something else. A voice. Faint. Distant. Saying words I couldn't quite make out. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. The voice didn't stop. I returned to Quantico a week later. The report was filed. The Forest Service initiated a review, and within a month, the Whitmore Wilderness area was officially closed to public access. The reason given to the press was geological instability. A convenient lie, simpler than the truth. Better for everyone. Gerald Sutton was identified and his remains were returned to his family. His sister was still alive in her 70s, living in Portland. She'd spent 33 years wondering what had happened to her brother. Now she knew. Or at least she knew as much as we could tell her. The case was closed. I moved on to other assignments, other profiles, other patterns of violence and madness. The work continued as it always did. But I was different. Something had shifted in me that night in the clearing, when I'd heard my own voice speaking from a future I hadn't reached yet. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop wondering what it meant. And I couldn't stop hearing things. It started small. A sense of déjà vu during meetings, as if I'd had the conversation before. A word on the tip of my tongue that turned out to be exactly what someone else was about to say. Moments where I knew what would happen a few seconds before it happened. Not premonition exactly, but memory. As if I were remembering events that hadn't occurred yet. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Stress, sleep deprivation, the psychological residue of a traumatic experience. I'd spent too much time thinking about time, about anomalies, about things that couldn't be explained. My brain was overstimulated. It was seeing patterns where none existed. That's what pattern recognition does. It finds connections, and when it doesn't find them, it invents them. I knew that. I'd studied it. False positives are the price we pay for being able to see real patterns at all. But the experiences kept happening, and they kept getting more specific. One morning, I woke up with the certainty that I would receive an email from Greaves at 9:15 a.m. asking me to consult on a case in Baltimore. I lay in bed for an hour, watching the clock, telling myself it was ridiculous. At 9:15, the email arrived. Another time, I was in a meeting with 3 other analysts discussing a profile for a serial arsonist in Ohio. I knew I absolutely knew that one of my colleagues, a woman named Carla Reese, was about to say, "What if the accelerant is homemade? Something he's mixing himself?" I knew it before she opened her mouth, before she drew breath to speak. And when she said it, those exact words, in that exact order, I felt something cold move through me. It wasn't possible. None of it was possible. But it was happening. I told myself it was nothing. Coincidence. Lucky guesses. The brain finding patterns in noise. I told myself that over and over like a mantra. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew stronger, more specific. One afternoon, I was reviewing a case file when I knew, with absolute certainty, that my phone was about to ring. I knew who would be calling and what they would say. 10 seconds later, the phone rang. It was Kellogg. "Agent Vance," he said, "I need to tell you something about the clearing." The exact words I'd expected. "Go ahead," I said. He told me he'd gone back again. He couldn't help himself. He'd stood at the edge of the clearing in the dark and listened. "I heard more voices," he said. "Not just mine, not just yours. Other voices, people I don't recognize. They were all talking about the clearing, all saying they had to go back, that they'd missed something, that there was something there they needed to find." How many voices? I don't know, a dozen, maybe more, overlapping like a crowd. He paused. "I think they're all the people who've ever gone there. Everyone who's ever heard the clearing speak. It records them, keeps them, plays them back." I thought about that. A clearing that collected voices, that captured moments and stored them and repeated them endlessly. "What do you think it wants?" I asked. "I don't know," Kellogg said, "but I think it's trying to bring them back, all of them. Everyone who's ever heard it. It wants them to return." After the call, I sat at my desk for a long time. I thought about the voices Kellogg had heard, the crowd of people all saying the same thing, all being drawn back. Was I one of them now? Would I hear myself in that chorus someday, my voice mixed with all the others, calling out from the clearing to whoever was listening? And more importantly, was I going to go back? I told myself no. The case was closed. There was no reason to return. Whatever was in that clearing, I'd done my job. I'd documented it. I'd recommended closure. I'd warned people away. But the thought stayed with me. The idea that I'd missed something. That there was more to find. That the clearing had shown me only a fragment of what it could show. 3 months after I returned to Quantico, I started having dreams. In the dreams, I was in the clearing, standing at the edge, looking in. The trees were taller than I remembered, their branches reaching toward the center like fingers. The depression where Gerald Sutton had died was deeper, darker, a wound in the earth. And in the center, something was waiting. I couldn't see it clearly. It was just a shape, a presence, a density in the air. But I knew it was aware of me. I knew it wanted me to come closer. In the dreams, I always walked in. I always stepped over the threshold, into the clearing toward the center. And the moment I did, the shape began to move, began to rise, and then I woke up. Every time I woke up at 3:47 a.m., every time the room was silent and dark. And every time, at the very edge of hearing, I could sense a sound, a hum, a vibration, a voice that wasn't quite there. I started sleeping poorly. I lost weight. I had trouble concentrating at work. My supervisor asked if everything was okay. I told him yes, I was lying, because the dreams were getting worse. And the feeling, the certainty, that I needed to go back was getting stronger. One night, lying in bed, unable to sleep, I made a decision. I was going to return to the clearing. One last time. I was going to step inside. I was going to see what was waiting for me. It was insane. It was suicidal. I knew that. But I also knew that if I didn't go, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering. The clearing had its hooks in me. The only way out was through. I requested leave. I flew to Oregon. I rented a car and drove to Lapine. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't tell Kellick. I reached the trailhead at sunset. The forest was quiet, the air cold. I hiked in, following the route I'd memorized, watching the shadows lengthen between the trees. When I reached the clearing, it was almost dark. The trees stood around the edge like sentinels, their branches motionless. The depression in the center was a black shape against the gray carpet of needles. I stood at the edge. I looked in. The sound began. It was louder than before, more insistent. A hum that built and built, filling the air, filling my head, and underneath it, voices. Many voices, overlapping, speaking all at once. I heard my own voice. I heard Kellick's voice. I heard voices I didn't recognize. Men and women, young and old, all saying the same thing. You came back. I knew you would. You have to see. You have to understand. Step in. Step in. Step in. I stood at the edge of the clearing, and I felt the pull. The weight of it, the gravity. Everything was drawing me toward the center. Every voice, every moment, every choice I'd made in my life, all of it leading here. I took a step, and then I stopped, because I remembered something. Something Kellick had said, something Dr. Whitmore had said, something the voice in the clearing had said. Once it knows you're listening, it doesn't let go. The clearing wanted me to enter. It was pulling me in, using the voices, using my own voice to draw me over the threshold. And if I went, I would be trapped. Like Gerald Sutton, like all the others. The voices were a lure, a trap, and I had almost fallen for it. I took a step back. The sound grew louder. The voices grew more urgent, more desperate. They called my name. They told me I was making a mistake. They told me I would regret it for the rest of my life. But I kept stepping back. 1 step, 2, 3, until I was at the tree line, at the edge of the clearing's influence. The sound faded. The voices diminished. The silence of the forest returned. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, my heart pounding. I had almost gone in. I had been 1 step away from joining the chorus, from becoming another voice calling out to whoever came next. But I hadn't. I had stopped. I turned and walked away from the clearing, back through the forest, through the dark, to the trailhead in my car. I drove to the airport and flew home. I went back to work. I filed my leave as personal time, no explanation. I didn't go back. But I still hear it. Every night in my apartment in Virginia, in the silence after midnight, I hear the hum, the vibration, the voices. I've tried to block it out. I sleep with music on, with the television, with white noise apps and sound machines, but the sound comes through. It's always there, underneath everything else, waiting. Kellick was right. The clearing records everyone who hears it. It keeps them. It plays them back. And now I'm part of that collection. My voice is in the chorus, and every night it calls to me. I've started researching, just like Dr. Whitmore did, just like I imagine Gerald Sutton did before he disappeared. I've found reports from around the world, places where time moves strangely, where voices echo from nowhere, where people are drawn back again and again. We're not alone in this. There are others. And I've started to wonder, what if we all went back? What if everyone who's heard the clearing returned at the same time? What if we all stepped in all at once and gave it what it wants? What would happen? I don't know. I'm not sure I want to know, but I think about it. Every night, lying in bed, listening to the hum, I think about it. And sometimes, more and more often, I think about going back, just to see, just to understand, just to find out what's really waiting in the center of that clearing. I haven't gone yet. I've resisted, I've stayed away. But the voice keeps calling. My own voice and all the others, whispering, insisting, promising. You'll come back. You always come back. Everyone comes back. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if choice is real, or if everything I do is just a step in a pattern that's already complete. But I know this. The clearing is waiting. It's been waiting for a long time, and it's patient. It can wait a little longer. So can I. For now. But every night when I close my eyes, I'm back at the edge, looking in, listening to the voices, deciding. And every night the pull gets a little stronger. Some places exist outside of time. Some moments refuse to end, and some choices, once made, echo forever. In the silence, in the trees, in the space between seconds where something waits and watches and calls. I made my choice. I walked away. But the clearing remembers. The clearing recorded me. And now my voice is there, in the dark, calling to whoever comes next. One day, I might answer. One day, I might go back. One day, I might step in and find out what's waiting. But not today. Today, I'm still deciding. Still standing at the threshold. Still listening to the voices call my name. There's a notebook on my desk now. I started keeping it a few weeks ago. In it, I write down every moment of déjà vu, every premonition, every time I know something before it happens. I've filled 20 pages already. The list keeps growing. I don't know what it means. I don't know if I'm developing some kind of ability, or if I'm losing my mind, or if the clearing did something to me that can't be undone. Maybe all three. Maybe none. But I know this. Something changed in that forest. Something fundamental. And I don't think I can change it back. Sometimes, late at night, I take out the notebook and read through the entries. All those moments when the future leaked through. All those times when I remembered things that hadn't happened yet. And I wonder, is this what Dr. Whitmore's student felt? Is this what Gerald Sutton experienced all those years in the clearing? Did they learn to see time differently too? Did they hear the voices? Did the voices ever stop? I don't know. I'll probably never know. But I know that the clearing is still out there, still waiting, still recording. And I know that someday, maybe soon, maybe years from now, I'm going to go back, because that's what it wants, and maybe, in the end, that's what I want too. Maybe I've always wanted it. Maybe I was meant to find that clearing all along. That's enough for now. There are frequencies the human ear isn't supposed to hear. Sounds that exist below the threshold of perception. Vibrations that move through walls and floors and bodies without ever registering as noise. We live surrounded by them. The hum of power lines, the pulse of distant machinery, the subsonic rumble of the earth itself. Most of the time, we don't notice. Our brains filter them out, classify them as irrelevant, let them pass without comment. But sometimes the filter breaks. Sometimes we hear things we shouldn't, and once you start hearing them, you can't stop. My name is Corbin Wraith. I'm a special agent with the FBI, currently assigned to the Dallas field office. I've been with the Bureau for 11 years, working primarily domestic terrorism and hate crimes. It's grim work, pipe bombs in mailboxes, swastikas painted on synagogues, manifestos full of rage and broken grammar. The worst of American anger, concentrated and weaponized. You see enough of it, you start to think you understand how darkness works, how it spreads, how it infects. Then, I caught the Dunmore case, and I realized I didn't understand anything. The call came in late March on one of those Texas afternoons when the sky is white with heat and the air feels like it's pressing down on you. I was at my desk in the field office reviewing surveillance reports on a militia group operating out of Waco. My supervisor, a career agent named Vaughn Castellano, appeared in my doorway with a folder in his hand and an expression I'd learned to recognize. It meant something complicated had landed on his desk, and he was about to make it my problem. "Wraith, you busy?" "Always. What have you got?" He dropped the folder on my desk. "Missing persons case out of Dunmore, small town, maybe 500 people, way out in West Texas. 3 residents have disappeared in the last 6 weeks. No bodies, no ransom demands, no evidence of foul play. Local sheriff is out of his depth. He requested federal assistance." I opened the folder. Inside were 3 missing persons reports, each with a photo and a brief summary. A woman in her 60s, a man in his 30s, a teenage girl. No apparent connection between them. Different ages, different backgrounds, different parts of town. The only thing they had in common was that they'd vanished. "Why us?" I asked. "This sounds like a state police matter." It was, until the sheriff mentioned something that caught the attention of our SAC. Castellano leaned against the doorframe. All 3 of them were complaining about the same thing before they disappeared. They were hearing sounds no one else could hear. I looked up at him. "Auditory hallucinations are a symptom of about a dozen different conditions," I said. "Schizophrenia, brain tumors, drug use, I know. But the sheriff says they were all mentally healthy. No history of illness, no medications, no substance abuse. And they all described the same sound, a tone, a frequency. Something they heard at night when everything else was quiet." "The same sound? That's a hell of a coincidence." "That's what the SAC thought. He wants you to check it out." Castellano straightened up. "Take Mira Okonkwo with you. She's got a background in acoustic analysis. Did her graduate work on infrasound before she joined the Bureau. If there's something in the air out there, she'll find it." I'd worked with Mira before. She was sharp, methodical, not easily rattled. If this case turned out to be something real, something beyond a shared delusion or a contaminated water supply, I'd want her expertise. I packed a bag and met Mira at the airport. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the terminal with a laptop open on her knees, scrolling through something I couldn't see. "Wraith," she said without looking up, "you read the file?" "On the way over. What do you think?" "I think 3 people in a town of 500 all hearing the same unexplained sound is statistically improbable." She closed the laptop. "I also think there's probably a mundane explanation. Industrial equipment, geological activity, something environmental. People underestimate how far sound can travel, especially at low frequencies. But," she looked at me, "but I've seen cases where the mundane explanation didn't fit, where the sound was real, but the source was never found. It happens more often than you'd think." We flew into Midland and rented an SUV for the drive to Dunmore. It took almost 3 hours, most of it on 2-lane roads that cut through flat, empty ranch land. The landscape was brown and beige and endless, dotted with mesquite trees and the occasional pump jack nodding slowly in the heat. The sky was enormous, a pale blue dome that seemed to press down on everything beneath it. Dunmore appeared on the horizon as a cluster of low buildings, a water tower, a church steeple. As we got closer, I could see the main street, a hardware store, a grocery, a diner, a gas station, the kind of town that existed to serve the ranches around it and not much else. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were noticed immediately. I'd seen towns like this before. They exist all over West Texas. Little clusters of humanity hanging on in the middle of nothing, sustained by ranching and oil and sheer stubbornness. The people who live in them are particular. They don't trust outsiders easily. They solve their own problems when they can. The fact that Sheriff Varner had called the FBI meant he was truly out of options. We pulled up to the sheriff's office and parked in the small lot out front. The building was modest, single-story, brick facade, American flag hanging limp in the still air. A patrol car sat in the shade of an awning, its windows down. Inside, through the glass door, I could see a reception desk and a hallway leading to offices in the back. The sheriff's office was in a small building next to the post office. Inside, it smelled like coffee and old paper. The sheriff himself was a man named Dale Varner, late 50s, sun-weathered face, the slow and careful manner of someone who'd spent his life solving problems without rushing. He had a firm handshake and eyes that assessed you without being aggressive about it. The kind of lawman who'd seen enough to be skeptical, but not enough to be cynical. I liked him immediately. He led us to his office, where he'd laid out the case files on his desk. The room was small and functional. Metal desk, filing cabinets, a window that looked out on the main street. On the wall was a map of Dunmore and the surrounding county, studded with pins in various colors. I assumed they marked the locations relevant to the disappearances. "Appreciate you coming," he said, gesturing for us to sit. "I'll be honest, I don't know what we're dealing with here. In 30 years, I've never seen anything like it." "Tell us about the disappearances," I said. "Start from the beginning." He did. The first to vanish was Eleanor Marsh, age 63, a retired schoolteacher who lived alone on the edge of town. She'd been seen at the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon, buying milk and bread. By Thursday, her neighbor noticed her mail was piling up. When the neighbor went to check, the house was empty. No sign of Eleanor, no note, no indication of where she'd gone. Her car was still in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen counter. "Did she have any family?" Mira asked. "A son in Lubbock. He hadn't heard from her. Said she seemed fine the last time they talked. No mention of travel, no plans to go anywhere." "And she was hearing sounds?" Varner nodded. Her neighbor mentioned it. Said Eleanor had been complaining for about 2 weeks before she disappeared. A humming noise, she called it. Something she heard at night when she was trying to sleep. The neighbor thought it might be tinnitus, told her to see a doctor. Eleanor said it wasn't in her ears, it was in the walls. The second disappearance was Kyle Rennert, age 34, a ranch hand who worked at one of the properties outside town. He'd been reliable for years, never missed a shift, never caused problems. Then, 3 weeks after Eleanor Marsh vanished, he didn't show up for work. His boss drove out to his trailer and found it empty. Kyle's truck was there, his phone was on the table, but Kyle was gone. "Same thing with the sounds?" I asked. "Same thing. His boss said Kyle had mentioned it a few times. Said he kept hearing a tone in his trailer at night. Thought it was electrical interference. Maybe something wrong with the wiring. He'd gone around unplugging things, turning off breakers, but he still heard it. Said it was driving him crazy." The third was the one that worried Varner most. Iris Calloway, age 16, a junior at the regional high school. She'd gone to bed on a Friday night and was gone by Saturday morning. Her window was open, but there was no sign of forced entry. Her parents were devastated, and certain that their daughter hadn't run away. "She was a good kid," Varner said. "Straight A's on the volleyball team, never in any trouble. Her parents said she'd been having trouble sleeping for about a week before she disappeared, complaining about a sound in her room. A frequency, she called it, like something was broadcasting. 3 people, 3 disappearances, and all of them hearing the same thing." "Did you investigate the sound?" I asked. "Check for sources?" "Best I could. I'm not an expert. I walked through Eleanor's house, Kyle's trailer, the Calloway place. Didn't hear anything unusual. Didn't find any equipment, any devices, anything that could be generating a signal. But I'm just one man with one pair of ears. If there's something out there operating on a frequency I can't perceive." He spread his hands. "That was why we were here." Mira and I spent the rest of the afternoon setting up. We'd brought equipment, spectrum analyzers, microphones sensitive to infrasound, recording devices that could capture frequencies below the range of human hearing. If there was a sound in Dunmore, we'd find it. We started at Eleanor Marsh's house. It was a small, tidy place, single-story, white siding, a porch with 2 rocking chairs. Inside, everything was neat and still. The furniture was old but well-maintained. Family photos on the walls, a bookshelf full of paperbacks. The life of a woman who'd lived alone and liked it that way. Mira set up the equipment while I walked through the rooms, looking for anything out of place. The kitchen was clean, the bedroom was made. There was a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, a pen resting in the fold. Nothing to suggest Eleanor had been planning to leave. Nothing to suggest she'd been taken against her will. "I'm getting some low-frequency activity," Mira said from the living room. "Background noise mostly. Traffic, wind, the usual. But there's something else." I walked over. She was looking at her laptop screen, where a spectrogram displayed the frequency analysis in real time. "There," she said, pointing. "See that spike? Around 18 hertz. It's faint, but it's consistent. And it's not coming from any obvious source." 18 hertz. Just below the threshold of human hearing. The kind of frequency that could cause unease, anxiety, even hallucinations if it was strong enough. "Can you locate it?" "Not yet, but I can try." We spent the next 2 hours moving through the house with a directional microphone, trying to triangulate the source. The signal was elusive. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Stronger in some rooms than others, but never pinpointing to a specific location. By the time the sun went down, we still hadn't found it. "Let's try the trailer tomorrow," Mira said, "and the Callaway house. If the signal is present in all 3 locations, we can map it, find the overlap." I agreed. But as we packed up the equipment, I felt something I hadn't expected. A sound, not with my ears, it was too low for that, but I felt it in my chest, in my skull, a pressure that hadn't been there before. A vibration, a tone. "Do you feel that?" I asked. Mira looked at me. "Feel what?" I listened. The sensation was gone. "Nothing," I said, "just tired." But it wasn't nothing, and I knew, even then, that I'd felt the same thing Eleanor Marsh had felt. The same thing Kyle Rennert had felt. The same thing Iris Callaway had felt. The signal was real, and it had noticed me. We spent the next 3 days mapping the sound. Kyle Rennert's trailer. The Callaway house. Other locations around town. The church, the grocery store, the water tower, the elementary school, an abandoned gas station on the edge of town. Everywhere we went, Mira's equipment picked up the same thing. A low-frequency signal hovering around 18 hertz, present but faint. Detectable, but only barely. The signal wasn't constant. It came and went, sometimes strong, sometimes almost absent. It didn't correlate with any obvious pattern, not time of day, not weather conditions, not traffic or industrial activity or electrical load on the local grid. We checked all of it. We mapped the fluctuations against every variable we could think of. Nothing correlated. The signal seemed to operate on its own logic, following rules we couldn't perceive. In the evenings, after we'd finished our field work, Mira and I would sit in the diner on Main Street, eating mediocre food and reviewing our data. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Carol, who seemed to know everything about everyone in Dunmore, would refill our coffee and ask how the investigation was going. We gave her vague answers. She seemed to know not to press. "You know," she said one night, unprompted, "there have always been stories about sounds out here. My grandmother used to talk about it. Said there was a hum in the desert, something you could hear if you were quiet enough. She called it the old voice, said it had been there since before anyone could remember." I looked at Mira. She looked at me. "Did she say anything else about it?" I asked. "Where it came from, what it meant?" Carol shook her head. "Just that you weren't supposed to listen too closely. She said if you listened too long, it would notice you." She smiled, a little embarrassed. Old folk stories. Probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. That night, back at the motel, I made a note to research local folklore. If the signal had been present for generations, if people had been hearing it long before Emmett Solis built his machine, that changed our understanding of what we were dealing with. "I've never seen anything like this," Mira said on the third night. We were in our motel room in Dunmore, a small, dated place with thin walls and a parking lot view. She was sitting at the desk, surrounded by equipment, staring at her laptop with an expression of frustrated concentration. "Can you trace it?" I asked. "I've tried. The signal is too diffuse. It's not coming from a single point. It's more like it's coming from everywhere at once, or from underground, or from the air itself." She shook her head. "I don't know how to explain it. Sound doesn't work this way. What if it's not sound? What if it's something else, electromagnetic, seismic, something we're misidentifying? I've checked for that. The equipment would pick it up. This is acoustic. It's a pressure wave, moving through air. It's sound. It just doesn't behave like any sound I've ever studied." I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. The night was dark and still. No moon, no streetlights, just the faint glow of the motel sign and the stars overhead. Dunmore felt like a place at the edge of the world. A place where the normal rules might not apply. "The people who heard it," I said. "They disappeared. Why? I don't know. Did they go toward it? Were they trying to find the source? Maybe. Or maybe the sound did something to them. Infrasound can cause psychological effects, anxiety, disorientation, even hallucinations. If the signal was strong enough, and they were exposed long enough, they could have wandered off, gotten lost. It's possible. But it didn't feel right. Eleanor Marsh was a retired school teacher who'd lived in Dunmore her whole life. She knew the area. She wouldn't have just wandered into the desert and disappeared. Neither would a ranch hand like Kyle Rennert, who'd spent years working outdoors in this terrain. And Iris Calloway was a teenager who vanished from her own bedroom. She hadn't wandered anywhere. Something else was happening. Something the sound was a part of. The next morning, I went to see Sheriff Varner. I wanted to know more about the town's history, whether anything like this had happened before, whether there were any local legends or rumors that might be relevant. Varner thought about it for a while, then said, "There is one thing. Might be nothing, but tell me." Back in the 70s, there was a man who lived outside town. Name was Emmett Solis. He was some kind of engineer, worked on radio equipment, communication systems, that sort of thing. Had a workshop on his property where he did his research. What kind of research? Nobody knew exactly. He kept to himself. But people said he was trying to build something. A transmitter, something that could send signals over long distances without using traditional radio waves. Varner shrugged. Most folks thought he was a crackpot. But then, in '79, he disappeared. Just like the others. Gone without a trace. Did anyone investigate? Sure. County sheriff at the time went out to Solis's property, looked around. Found his workshop empty. Equipment still there, notes still on the desk, but no sign of Emmett. They searched for weeks. Never found him. What happened to the property? It's still there. Nobody's touched it since. It's on county land now. Ownership reverted after Emmett was declared dead. Every few years, someone talks about tearing it down, but nothing ever comes of it. I want to see it. Varner looked at me for a long moment. I figured you would. We drove out to the Solis property that afternoon. Me, Mira, and Varner. It was about 10 miles outside town, down a dirt road that cut through empty rangeland. The landscape out here was even more desolate than around Dunmore. Just scrub brush and red earth and the occasional skeletal tree baking in the sun. We saw no other vehicles, no other people. Nothing to suggest that anyone had come this way in years. The workshop appeared around a bend in the road. A low, corrugated metal building. Rusted, the color of old blood. Surrounded by the remains of what had once been a fence. The wooden posts were still standing, but the wire between them had long since collapsed or been taken. Next to the workshop was a small house, single story, with a caved-in porch and windows black with grime. The place looked like it had been abandoned decades ago, which of course it had. We parked in front of the workshop and got out. The silence was immense. No wind, no birds, no insects. Just the three of us and the two buildings and the empty desert stretching away in every direction. Nobody's been inside in years, Varner said as we approached. Might not be safe. The roof looks like it could come down any minute. We'll be careful. The door to the workshop was locked, but the lock was old and corroded. A few strikes with a rock and it gave way. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale and hot, thick with the smell of dust and old metal. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the roof, casting strips of light across the floor. Particles of dust danced in the beams, disturbed by our entry. The workshop was full of equipment. Oscilloscopes, signal generators, racks of vacuum tubes and transistors. Cables coiled on the floor like sleeping snakes. On one wall there was a large antenna array, parabolic dishes and dipole elements, all pointed toward the ceiling. On another wall, a bank of amplifiers and transmitters, their dials set to frequencies I didn't recognize. And in the center of the room, on a heavy wooden table, there was something else. It was a machine. I don't know how else to describe it. A metal frame, about the size of a refrigerator, filled with components I couldn't identify. Coils and capacitors and crystal resonators, all connected by wires in a pattern that seemed both random and deliberate. At the top was a speaker cone, large, maybe 18 inches across, pointed straight up at the ceiling. "What the hell is that?" Varner asked. Mira was already moving toward it, her eyes wide. "It's a transducer, a device for converting electrical signals into sound waves." She walked around the machine, examining it from different angles. "But the design is... I've never seen anything like this. The frequency range would be enormous, and the power requirements." She pointed at the cables running from the machine to a bank of heavy-duty batteries against the wall. This thing was meant to generate serious output. "Infrasound?" I asked. "Possibly, probably. Look at the size of that speaker cone. It's designed for low-frequency reproduction. Very low." She crouched down to look at the base of the machine. "There are settings here. Dials, switches. I think you could tune it to specific frequencies. Like 18 hertz. She looked at me. Exactly like 18 hertz. I felt something cold move through me. Emmett Solis built a machine that generates the same signal we've been detecting all over town. He disappeared in 1979. And now, 45 years later, 3 more people have disappeared after hearing the same sound. That's the implication. Is the machine still working? Could it still be broadcasting? Mira examined the batteries. These are dead, have been for decades. There's no power here. She stood up and looked around the workshop. But the signal's still out there. We've measured it. So either there's another source we haven't found, or the machine did something that's still happening, something it started and never stopped. We searched the rest of the workshop. On a desk in the corner, we found Emmett Solis's notes. Dozens of notebooks, filled with dense handwriting and technical diagrams. I couldn't understand most of it, but some phrases stood out. Resonant frequency of local geology, carrier wave for nonverbal communication, threshold signal, once initiated, self-sustaining. And on the last page of the last notebook, a single sentence. I can hear them now. They want me to come. I closed the notebook. Who's them? Varner asked. I didn't answer. I didn't know. But I was starting to think that Emmett Solis had built a machine to send a signal. And something had sent a signal back. That night, in the motel room, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the machine. The notebooks. The phrase that kept running through my head. They want me to come. Who were they? Where did they want him to come? And were they calling the others now? Eleanor Marsh, Kyle Rennert, Iris Calloway. Had they heard the signal and followed it? Were they still following it, somewhere out in the darkness? Around 2 a.m, I heard it. The tone, the frequency. The same pressure I'd felt in Eleanor Marsh's house, but stronger now, closer. I sat up in bed. The room was dark and quiet. The air conditioning hummed. Outside, nothing moved, but the sound was there. I felt it in my chest, in my teeth, in the bones of my skull. A vibration, a presence, a voice without words. It was coming from outside, from the desert. From somewhere out in the darkness beyond the motel, beyond the town, beyond anything I could see. I got out of bed. I walked to the window. The parking lot was empty. The road was dark. But past the road, past the last buildings of Dunmore, the desert stretched away into nothing. And somewhere out there, the sound was waiting. I wanted to go to it. The urge was sudden and overwhelming. I wanted to walk out of the motel, get in my car, drive toward the sound. I wanted to find the source. I wanted to see what was calling. I stood at the window for a long time, feeling the pull. It was like a hook in my chest, drawing me forward. Then I closed my eyes. I breathed. I stepped back. The sound faded. The pull diminished. I was still in my room, still in control. But I understood now. I understood what had happened to Eleanor Marsh, to Kyle Rennert, to Iris Calloway. They'd heard the call, and they'd answered it. The next morning, I told Mira what I'd experienced. She listened without interrupting, her expression serious. You felt a compulsion, she said, an urge to move toward the sound. Yes, it was strong, almost irresistible. But you resisted. Barely. She was quiet for a moment. Infrasound can affect mood and behavior. There's documented research. It can cause feelings of unease, anxiety, even awe. Some studies suggest it might be responsible for reports of haunted houses, religious experiences, encounters with the supernatural. The body responds to frequencies it can't consciously perceive. This wasn't just a mood effect, it was a directive. It was telling me to come. I know. She looked at me with concern. Corbin, maybe you shouldn't stay in the field on this one. If the signal is affecting you, it's affecting everyone. Everyone who can hear it. That's the whole point. I stood up and walked to the window. Emmett Solis heard it and disappeared. The 3 missing persons heard it and disappeared. If we don't figure out what's happening, more people will hear it. More people will vanish. Then we need to find the source. We've tried. Your equipment can detect the signal, but it can't trace it. Then we need another approach. She thought for a moment. The machine. Solus's transmitter. What if we can use it to locate the source? If it was designed to send a signal on the same frequency, maybe we can reverse engineer it. Use it as a directional receiver instead of a transmitter. It was a good idea. Better than anything I had. We went back to the workshop that afternoon. Mira spent hours examining the machine, tracing its circuits, figuring out how it worked. I helped where I could, but mostly I watched. She was in her element, focused, precise, completely absorbed in the technical puzzle. By evening, she had it figured out. The machine sends a signal on a specific frequency, she said, but it's also designed to receive on that same frequency. It's a transceiver, not just a transmitter, and the receiving component is directional. It can tell which direction the incoming signal is coming from. So, we can use it to find the source. Theoretically, the batteries are dead, so we'll need to bring in a generator. And I don't know what kind of shape the components are in after 45 years, but if it works, we can find out where the signal is coming from. Yes. We drove back to town and rented a generator from the hardware store. The owner, a taciturn man named Hector, looked at us like we were crazy when we told him what we needed it for. But he took our money and helped us load it into the SUV. That night, we set up at the workshop. Mira connected the generator to the machine and powered it up. The old components hummed and crackled, reluctant to wake after so long. But slowly, the dials began to move. The meters began to register. The machine came alive. Mira adjusted the frequency to 18 hertz. Then she activated the receiving function. The needle on the directional indicator swung immediately. It pointed northeast, toward the desert, away from town. Got it, Mira said. The signal is coming from that direction. Distance, I can't tell exactly, but it's out there. Can we follow it? We can try. If I monitor the signal strength as we move, I should be able to triangulate the source. We loaded the equipment into the SUV and drove northeast on the only road that went that direction. A 2-lane highway that cut through empty ranch land. The night was dark and moonless. The headlights carved a tunnel through the blackness, and beyond their reach, there was nothing. Just the void. Mira watched the instruments while I drove. The signal strength increased as we moved. Slowly at first, then more rapidly. We were getting closer. After about 20 miles, she said, "Stop here." I pulled over to the side of the road. We were in the middle of nowhere. No buildings, no lights, no indication that anyone had ever been here. "The signal is strongest here," Mira said. "It's coming from that way." She pointed into the darkness, off the road, into the open desert. How far? A mile, maybe 2. Hard to say. I looked out at the blackness. There was nothing to see, just flat ground and scrub brush and the faint silhouette of the distant mountains. But somewhere out there something was broadcasting. Something was calling. "We should wait until morning," Mira said. "Come back with proper gear. Maybe bring the sheriff." She was right. It was the sensible thing to do. But I didn't want to wait. The pull was there again, the hook in my chest, the urge to move toward the sound. It was stronger now, almost painful. I could feel the signal like a physical force, drawing me forward. "I'm going to take a look," I said. "Corbin, just a quick look. Stay here with the equipment. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, call Varner." She didn't like it. I could see it in her face. The tightening of her jaw, the furrow between her eyebrows. But she didn't argue. Maybe she understood that I needed to do this. Or maybe she knew that arguing wouldn't change my mind. 30 minutes, she said. Not a second more. 30 minutes. I got out of the SUV and stood in the darkness for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. The night was immense out here. The sky was a dome of stars, more than I'd ever seen anywhere else, and below it was nothing. Just the flat black expanse of the desert, stretching away in all directions. I felt small, insignificant, like a mote of dust floating in an ocean. I turned on my flashlight and walked into the desert. The ground was hard and uneven, covered in rocks and dry grass that crunched under my boots. I moved carefully, scanning the terrain ahead, watching for holes or drop-offs. The darkness was absolute. No ambient light, no reference points. Nothing but the beam of my flashlight and the sound pulling me onward. I could feel the signal getting stronger as I walked. The vibration in my chest intensified. The tone became more distinct, more present, like a voice speaking from just behind me. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was a presence, an awareness, something that knew I was coming and was waiting for me to arrive. I thought about turning back. I thought about the sensible thing, returning to the SUV, calling for backup, approaching this with proper resources and planning. That's what training dictated. That's what experience recommended. But the pull was too strong, and some part of me, some irrational primal part, needed to see what was out there, needed to understand. After about 15 minutes, I saw something ahead, a shape in the darkness, low and angular. As I got closer, I could make it out. It was a hole, a depression in the ground, roughly circular, maybe 20 feet across. The sides were steep, almost vertical, descending into blackness. My flashlight couldn't reach the bottom. I stood at the edge and looked down. The sound was coming from inside. It was louder here, more intense, not just a pressure but a vibration that seemed to resonate with my whole body. I could feel it in my heartbeat, in my breathing, in the rhythm of my thoughts. It was calling me, inviting me, promising something I couldn't name. I wanted to go down. I wanted to descend into the hole and find the source. I wanted to see what was making the sound, what had called Emmett Solis and Eleanor Marsh and Kyle Rennert and Iris Calloway. I wanted to understand. I took a step toward the edge. Then I stopped, because I heard something else. A voice, not the signal, a human voice, coming from inside the hole. "Hello?" I leaned forward, shining my flashlight down into the darkness. "Hello? Is someone there?" The voice was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, frightened. "My name is Agent Corbin Wraith, FBI," I called down. "Who's down there?" A pause, then, Please help me. I can't get out." "What's your name?" Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Iris. My name is Iris Calloway." The missing teenager. She was alive. She was down in the hole, and she'd been there for days, and she was alive. I turned and ran back to the SUV. We called Sheriff Varner. He came with 2 deputies and rescue equipment, ropes, harnesses, a winch mounted on the back of his truck. It took 3 hours to rig a safe descent and bring Iris out. She was dehydrated, disoriented, and covered in dirt, but she was alive. Alive after days in the darkness, without food, without water, without any way to climb the sheer walls of the hole. While the deputies worked the winch, I stood at the edge and watched. The first light of dawn was touching the horizon, turning the eastern sky from black to gray to pale orange. Below me, in the hole, I could hear the rescue team talking to Iris, keeping her calm, getting her into the harness. And underneath their voices I could still hear the signal. Fainter now that I was above ground, but present, always present. When they brought her up, she was shaking. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes were wide and glassy, the eyes of someone who'd seen too much darkness. The EMTs wrapped her in a blanket and started an IV, and she just sat there, staring at nothing, trembling. I crouched down next to her. "Iris, my name is Agent Wraith. You're safe now. We're going to take you to the hospital, get you checked out. Your parents are on their way." She looked at me. For a moment, I wasn't sure she understood. Then she said, in a voice that was barely a whisper, "I can still hear it." I nodded. "I know. It's still down there. It's still calling. I know." She grabbed my arm. Her grip was weak but desperate. "Don't go down there," she said. "Don't listen to it. It wants you to come, but you can't. You can't." I didn't know what to say, so I just held her hand until the EMTs were ready to take her to the ambulance. She couldn't remember how she'd gotten into the hole. She couldn't remember anything after lying down in her bed on the night she disappeared. "I just woke up down there," she said in the ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, an IV in her arm. "In the dark, I didn't know where I was. I could hear the sound, the frequency. It was so loud, but I couldn't move. I couldn't climb out. The walls were too steep. I just waited. I called for help, but nobody came. I didn't think anyone would find me." "Did you see anyone else down there?" I asked. "Eleanor Marsh? Kyle Rennert?" She shook her head. "I was alone, the whole time, just me and the sound." "How long did it feel like you were down there?" She thought about it. "I don't know. Days, maybe. A week? I couldn't tell. There was no light, no way to measure time. It all just blurred together." She'd been gone for 5 days. To her, it had felt like an eternity. We searched the hole at first light. Getting down was easier than getting out had been for Iris. We had ropes, harnesses, flashlights, all the equipment we needed. But standing at the edge, preparing to descend, I felt a resistance I hadn't expected. My body didn't want to go down there. Some primitive part of my brain was screaming at me to step back, to stay above ground, to get as far from this place as possible. I went anyway. Mira and one of the deputies came with me. The descent took about 5 minutes. The walls of the hole were sheer rock, almost vertical, with no handholds or ledges. I understood now why Iris couldn't climb out. Without equipment, it would have been impossible. At the bottom was a chamber, roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across with a ceiling about 15 feet high. The floor was covered in fine sand, pale and soft, undisturbed except for the marks where Iris had sat and walked and waited for rescue. And on the walls, carved into the rock, were symbols. I swept my flashlight across the chamber and stopped breathing. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They covered every surface, the walls, the ceiling, even parts of the floor where the sand had been brushed away. Lines and curves and patterns, carved deep into the stone. They looked almost like writing, like a language, but in no alphabet I'd ever seen. The shapes were angular and flowing at the same time, repeating in patterns that seemed almost mathematical, but never quite resolved into anything recognizable. "What is this?" Varner's voice came down from above. He was standing at the edge of the hole, looking down at us. I didn't answer. I was looking at something else. In the center of the chamber, half buried in the sand, was a metal object. I crouched down and brushed away the sand to reveal it. It was a speaker cone, large, maybe 18 inches across, identical to the one in Emmett Solis's machine. "He put it here," I said, my voice echoing in the chamber. "Solis, he built a transmitter and put the speaker down here, in this chamber. That's how the signal propagates. The chamber acts like an amplifier, a resonator, broadcasting through the rock." Mira was examining the walls, running her fingers over the carvings. "These symbols," she said, "they're old, really old, centuries, maybe millennia. Look at the weathering, the erosion patterns. Someone was down here a long time before Emmett Solis. But the machine has no power, I said. The batteries are dead. They've been dead for decades. I looked around the chamber. The carvings on the walls, the strange resonant space, the feeling that we were standing inside something much older than Emmett Solis's experiment. Much older than Dunmore. Maybe much older than humanity itself. Maybe it doesn't need the machine anymore, I said. Maybe Solis just activated something. Something that was already here, something that's been here for a long time, waiting to be turned on. The signal was still present. I could feel it in the chamber, stronger than ever. A vibration, a frequency, a presence. And I could feel it calling. Not to me, not anymore, but to others. Out in the darkness, across the desert, across the world. The signal was broadcasting. It was searching. It was looking for people who could hear it, and when it found them, it would call them here. Iris Calloway recovered. Physically, at least. Within a week, she was back home with her parents trying to resume her normal life. But she wasn't the same. She told the doctors that she still heard the sound, fainter now, but present. A whisper in the back of her mind that never quite went away. It's like it's waiting, she said. Like it knows I heard it. Like it's keeping track of me. I understood what she meant. I heard it too. We never found Eleanor Marsh or Kyle Rennert. We searched the chamber, the surrounding desert, every abandoned mine and cave system within 50 miles. Nothing. They were gone. Vanished, as completely as Emmett Solis had vanished 45 years before. I wrote my report. I described the signal, the machine, the chamber. I recommended that the area be secured, the hole filled in, the Solis workshop demolished. I recommended that the phenomenon be classified and that no further personnel be exposed to the signal without protective measures. Castellano read the report and called me into his office. "This is unusual," he said. "Yes, sir. You're telling me that a man in the 1970s built a machine that activated some kind of ancient signal broadcasting system, and that this signal has been calling people into the desert for decades. That's my assessment." He looked at me for a long moment. "And you have no explanation for how the signal continues to broadcast without power. No explanation for the symbols in the chamber. No explanation for why some people can hear the signal and others can't." "No, sir, I don't." He sighed. "Neither do I." He closed the folder. "I'll forward this to Washington. Let them decide what to do with it." I never heard what they decided. The case was taken out of my hands, reclassified, moved to a department I didn't have clearance to access. Dunmore went back to being a quiet town in the middle of nowhere. The hole in the desert was filled in with concrete and covered over. The Solis workshop was torn down, but the signal didn't stop. I know because I still hear it. Every night, when the world is quiet, it's there. A vibration at the edge of the perception. A tone I feel more than hear. It's fainter than it was in Dunmore. I'm far away now, back in Dallas, back in my normal life. But it's present, constant, waiting. I've done research. I've looked for others who have experienced the same thing. I've found reports, scattered, fragmentary, dismissed as hallucinations or hoaxes, of people who hear unexplained sounds, low frequencies, signals without sources. They come from all over the world: Brazil, Russia, Australia, Japan. Different cultures, different languages, but the same experience. A sound that calls to them, an urge to follow it. Some of them disappear, like Eleanor Marsh. Some of them resist, like me. But all of them are changed. I've started keeping a journal. Every night, I write down what I hear. The pitch, the duration, the intensity. I've noticed patterns. The signal is stronger at certain times, weaker at others. It fluctuates with the lunar cycle, with solar activity, with factors I haven't been able to identify. It's not random. It's not mechanical. It's responding to something. Adjusting, learning. I don't know what it wants. I don't know who or what is sending it. I don't know why some people can hear it and others can't. But I have a theory. The symbols in the chamber were old. Thousands of years old, maybe older. Someone carved them there long before Emmett Solis was born. Long before there was a town called Dunmore, or a state called Texas, or a country called America. Someone, or something, built that chamber, tuned it, prepared it for a purpose. And maybe that purpose is contact. Maybe the signal is a message, a beacon, a call across vast distances, not just miles, but something more. Time, space, dimensions we don't have names for. Maybe something is trying to reach us, has been trying for a very long time, and maybe Emmett Solis figured out how to answer. I think about that a lot, about the last line in his notebook. They want me to come. He heard the signal, he followed it. He went into the desert, into the hole, into the chamber, and he never came back. Where did he go? Is he still there somewhere in whatever place the signal leads to? Is he alive? Is he aware? Are Eleanor Marsh and Kyle Rennert with him now? I don't know. I'll probably never know. But I know this. The signal is still out there, still broadcasting, still searching for people who can hear it. And when it finds them, it will call to them. It will pull them towards the source. It will promise them something they can't name but can't resist, and some of them will answer, I haven't. Not yet. I've resisted. I've stayed in my life, done my job, kept my distance. But the pull is always there. The hook in my chest. The urge to go back to that place, to descend into the darkness, to find out what's calling. Every night, it gets a little stronger. Every night I wonder how long I can resist. Last week, I requested a transfer. I told Castellano I needed a change of scenery. He approved it without question. I'm moving to the Seattle field office, as far from Dunmore as I can get without leaving the country. I don't know if it will help. I don't know if distance matters. The signal isn't bound by geography. It exists at a frequency that passes through walls and mountains and continents. It can reach me anywhere, but I have to try. I have to believe that I can escape it, that I can live a normal life, do my job, forget what I heard in the desert. I have to believe that I'm not already lost. Mira calls me sometimes. She's still in Dallas, still working acoustic analysis, still trying to understand what we found in Dunmore. She's been in contact with researchers at universities, specialists in infrasound, experts in geophysics. She's trying to find a scientific explanation for the signal. I don't think she'll find one, but I admire her persistence. It's her way of coping. Some people need to understand things to accept them. I've gone the other direction. I've stopped trying to understand. I've accepted that there are things beyond my comprehension, things that exist outside the framework of rational explanation. The signal is one of them. The chamber is one of them. Whatever took Emmett Solis and Eleanor Marsh and Kyle Rennert, that's one of them too. I can't explain it, but I can feel it. Every night, in the silence, I can feel it calling. I've thought about telling someone. A therapist, maybe, a doctor. But what would I say? That I hear sounds no one else can hear? That I feel compelled to walk into the desert? They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I am. Or maybe my mind is expanding, opening up to frequencies it never perceived before, tuning in to signals that have always been there, that humanity has always been able to hear, but chosen to ignore. Maybe the people who disappear aren't victims. Maybe they're explorers, pioneers, the first to answer a call that's been waiting for thousands of years. I don't believe that. I can't believe that. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder. Because sometimes, late at night, I find myself standing at the window, looking out at the darkness, feeling the pull. And I don't remember getting out of bed, and I don't remember walking to the window, and I don't know how long I've been standing there. The signal is calling. Sooner or later, everyone answers. I just hope it's not tonight. There's a photograph on my desk. I took it in Dunmore on our last day there. It shows the hole in the desert, just a dark circle in the red earth. Nothing special, nothing that would tell you what was down there. I keep it as a reminder, a warning. Sometimes I look at it and I think about going back, about descending into the darkness one more time, about seeing the chamber with the carvings, the speaker cone in the sand, the symbols that have been there for thousands of years. Sometimes I think that if I could just understand what those symbols mean, if I could just decode the message, it would all make sense. The signal, the disappearances, the pull. There's an answer down there. There has to be. But that's how it gets you. That's how it draws you in. You tell yourself you're just going to look, just going to understand. And then you're standing at the edge, and then you're climbing down, and then you're in the chamber with the sound filling your head. And then you're gone. I won't let that happen to me. I can't. But every night, the signal gets a little louder. Every night, the pull gets a little stronger. And every night, I wonder how much longer I can hold out. Some sounds aren't meant to be heard. Some signals aren't meant to be answered. And some calls, once you hear them, never stop. I heard the call. I felt the pull. I'm still feeling it. Every night, a little stronger. Every night, a little closer to saying yes. I'll hold out as long as I can. I'll resist. I'll fight. But I know how this ends. Everyone who hears it knows how this ends. You follow the signal, you go into the dark, and you don't come back. Not as yourself. Maybe not at all.